Morning glory, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That picking you here is Lester Flatt, who hails from Sparta, Tennessee. A new affiliate on the Hugh Hewitt Show is News Talk 1050 in Sparta. Added up on yesterday. I said, well, I never got, you're asking, I know you're asking, did you get to play with him? No, I never got to play with Lester. Never crossed paths with him. I'm looking at a picture of him, though, monument to him in the middle of Sparta, Tennessee on Main Street at Liberty Square. And I admired his music. Flat and Scruggs, you all know that. You should. But I'm so happy to be on in his hometown of Sparta, Tennessee. Good morning, Sparta. Your senator, Bill Hagerty, will be on with us a little bit later today on the Hugh Hewitt Show. I think he become 421. I'm not sure how many affiliates we have. They grow in number. Mike Gallagher is green with envy every day that happens, and that's okay, Mike. Don't worry about it. You do well. You do well, and for a boy from Dayton, you're doing okay. We appreciate you. Turbulent night. For our new listeners in Sparta on News Talk 1050, I'm Hugh Hewitt, and what I normally do is begin every single day, every single show with a rundown of the big news, called The Rundown. And the reason is some people only have 8 minutes for their news. And if they listen to the rundown that I post every day at hughhewitt.com and at my YouTube channel and on Spotify and iTunes and all that, the rundown is this first segment in every interview I do. If you just want the news, this is what you listen to. By now, you will know that they had a killing of an unarmed, suspected arrest dodger. Guy was running from the cops after he'd been stopped, got back into his car. His name is Daunte Wright. And Daunte Wright, 2 nights ago, or 2 afternoons ago, was shot and killed by police officers. He fled from police. It seems to me the accounts are a little bit difficult to read, but it appears as though he got out of his car, and then when the officer said, "We've got an arrest warrant for you," he got back into the car, and she intended to tase him, and she instead shot and killed him. He drove a while and crashed. Minnesota police chief says officer shot and killed black man in error, and that is according to the Financial Times. The New York Post says body cam footage of police shooting of Daunte Wright was released. It was difficult to watch. Minnesota police officer who shot Daunte Wright, according to the Washington Post, exclaimed, "Oh, blank, I shot him." Female, and she is a 27-year veteran of the force. Her name was released earlier today. What we know about it is, according to Chief Tim Gannon of the Brooklyn Center Police Department, officers pulled Mr. Wright over on Sunday afternoon for a traffic violation related to expired registration tags. Officers then discovered that he had a warrant for his arrest. As the police tried to detain Mr. Wright, he stepped back into his car, prompting a brief struggle with officers. In graphic body footage shown to reporters on Monday, this is from the New York Times, one officer can be seen pointing a handgun at him and shouting, "Taser." After the car pulls away, the officer yells an obscenity and says, "I shot him," to 2 other officers, according to the video. The car traveled several blocks, struck another vehicle. The police and medical workers pronounced Mr. Wright dead on the scene. Quote, "It is my belief that the officer had the intention to deploy their taser, but instead shot Mr. Wright with a single bullet," Chief Gannon said. "This appears to me, from what I viewed, and the officer's reaction and distress immediately after, that this was an accidental discharge that resulted in the tragic death of Mr. Wright." The Brooklyn city mayor made some remarks, and after that, the Brooklyn city manager called for due process for the police officer, and he was fired immediately thereafter because that is apparently not his job to call for due process. And it might not be his job to call for due process. His job, city managers, honestly, they're supposed to be seen at city council meetings and no other time, basically, unless it's an emergency services. Well, they had riots last night. Of course, we expected that. I said that yesterday, and they were fairly large, and they went on until about midnight. The curfew was at 7 p.m. last night, and the Star Tribune of the Twin Cities reports that It's not expected to change. It just went on and on for a long period of time, and no one was killed. Whether or not injuries occurred, I cannot tell you, but the unrest was prolonged. Tear gas used, dozens of arrests were made, military vehicles rumbled down city streets as businesses hastily closed, and it's going to be a rough week. All right, so Governor Tim Walz issued a curfew in Hennepin, Ramsey, and Dakota counties from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m., but that was not honored. It was honored in the breach in and around Brooklyn City, and we'll keep you posted on it. Meanwhile, the Virginia Attorney General has launched a civil rights probe of the Black Army officer's violent traffic stop, which many of you have seen. Lieutenant, I think he was a captain for some reason. I think he was a captain, was pulled over and refused to get out of the car, and when he got out of the car, was assaulted, and many people. Karen Nazario, Army Second Lieutenant. Okay, I thought he was a captain. Army Second Lieutenant Karen Nazario pulled over because his newly purchased SUV lacked a permanent license plate, held at gunpoint, pepper sprayed, struck, and handcuffed. The temporary tag was taped to his window. Nazario said in a federal lawsuit that he filed against officers. Calls have been mounting for an independent investigation of the controversial police-involved incidents in Virginia in recent months, and so the Virginia AG has launched one. So that's the domestic news. Let's give you some good news. COVID-19 drug, Regeneron, pharmaceutical drug, prevents symptomatic disease in a study. Now, that's good because not everyone can get the vaccine. Get the vaccine, get the vaccine. Go around, check today, check your websites. It's the best thing to have. If you'll notice, the ridiculous Christopher Guest hair that I had yesterday and Christopher Lloyd hair that I had yesterday is all gone. Got to the barber yesterday. It was a wonderful thing to go back to the barber, vaccinated. She still wore a mask, and I didn't because cutting your hair with a mask is kind of hard. But she understood I was good to go, and I don't know if she's been vaccinated or not, but I'm not worried about it. And now, if you haven't been vaccinated and you've got the antibodies showing you've got it, they can give you this new drug from Regeneron, and 81% better results. People don't develop symptoms. So it's a preventative application. So if you're feeling poorly, get you to a hospital. Do not sit around at home and wait and see whether it gets worse, because if you can get it early, my friend Dave Zavagno in Cleveland just likes to say the biggest mistake was we did not encourage people to get care early. We told them to stay away from hospitals for fear of spreading it, and we could have nipped so many of the deaths in the bud, but you learn as you go along in a pandemic. Nobody's fault. Nobody learned anything. Inflation likely gained steam in March as economic recovery gained steam in March. Wall Street Journal this morning, U.S. consumer prices picked up sharply in March as the economic recovery gained momentum. We expect the Labor Department to report the price index jumping today. We will see. Important story in the Wall Street Journal as well. Americans have too much toilet paper. Yes, that's true. After a year in which toilet paper shortages left consumers scrambling for squares, sales are plummeting to below pre-pandemic levels. I don't think we're using the bathroom list. I just think we've got enough supply of toilet paper to last for a year. Meanwhile, that nuclear facility in Natanz in Iran, it blew up somehow. They lost power, caused much of damage. It set back their program by 9 months. They are, of course, blaming Israel, who's not saying anything, of course, which means exactly what you think it means. Do not screw around with the Israelis. Prince Harry is going off to the funeral. China has a message for America, according to the Wall Street Journal. We're an equal now. They're not, but they're very strong. Ant, Chinese holding company led by Jack Ma, the wealthiest private sector individual, has been ordered to restructure by Chinese regulator. Jack Ma is feeling his oats. A court in Xinjiang will hear a defamation case against a German researcher who accused Beijing of human rights abuses in the area. Of course, there's nothing to see here. All these people in concentration camps with heads shaved. And President Xi is going to attend a 2-day virtual summit on climate hosted by Joe Biden and John Kerry. I am expecting at any day now that we will exchange recognition of China's ridiculous 9-dash line for climate reductions promised in March of 2080. Uber posted a record demand in March. We are back, America. Stay tuned.
Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Holding in my baby brown libertarian fingers an article from the Daily Mail. This is the headline. Outgoing CNN anchor Brooke Baldwin rails against network about lack of women in leadership, saying, quote, the most influential and highest paid anchors are men, close quote, just months after she was temporarily taken off the air and replaced by Jake Tapper. And it goes on and talks about how she's expected to leave this month. And she gave an interview with Ms. Magazine. I had no idea Ms. Magazine was still being published. Is it still being published? Wow. I should start subscribing. I had no idea. Again. Ms. Magazine, she said, quote, the most influential anchors on our network, the highest paid, are men. My bosses, my executives, are men. The person who oversees CNN Dayside is a man. And my executive producer for 10 years is a man. So I've been surrounded by a lot of men. End of quote. And your complaint is that they smell bad, that they don't shower, they don't put the toilet seat down. What's your complaint? Quote, I know personally I fight for women's stories, but I get told no a lot, and I still manage to do it. End of quote. There's a lot more I need to do outside the walls of this place, close quote. So she's leaving CNN, says CNN is sexist, the same organization that for 4 years referred to President Donald Trump as sexist.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Dennis Prager Show.
Unlike the history of the United States, we now are guided by the frightened. The frightened make policy. That's the difference. It's the opposite of the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. All right, Joseph in Baltimore, Maryland. Hello.
Hey, Dennis.
Hi.
You admitted on Tuesday that Israel's done the exact opposite of everything you recommended.
Right.
They've had 6,000 deaths. They have 36 times fewer people. 36 times 6,000 is 220,000. They have almost a third the number of deaths we have. From which I would draw the conclusion that everything you recommended is wrong.
Well, how do you answer this? I looked it up, seeing your call. I looked up the list of countries. 150 countries have fewer deaths per million than Israel. So why do you pick Israel versus the U.S. and not Israel versus the 150 countries, 150 that did better than Israel and didn't do what Israel did?
Well, your recommendations were for the
wait, please answer my question. I thought I answered yours. You compare Israel only to the U.S. I compare Israel to all other countries. I think that's more scientifically.
You've admitted yourself that countries that are homogenous, like Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, aren't comparable. You don't compare the United States to South Korea. Israel's in
right, but I didn't. I said 150 countries. They're not all homogenous. Okay, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt.
They gave away all their hydroxychloroquine. They shut down 3 times, and they have one-third the number of deaths we do.
Right, and they would have had a lot fewer deaths had they allowed ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
He's made a very big deal about
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. You may not know this, but US 70 goes through Sparta, Tennessee. I'm very pleased that the Broadway of America, as it's called, when it opened in 1785. That's what the 70 is called in Tennessee. And it came over the East Branch of the Chickamauga Path by Sand Springs. The Calf Killer River runs through Sparta, Tennessee. I always look up my new affiliates, News Talk 1050 in Sparta, so that I am aware. I can drive. I can be there. I can be in Sparta in about 5 hours, it says to me. I may have to drive down there and straighten that place out. Bill Hagerty's on a little bit later today. We'll talk to him about it. I wanted to go back to that story about Uber. Uber reported record ridership. And I think that's amazing, given that I wouldn't get in an Uber until I got vaccinated. I only got vaccinated in March. I took my first Uber yesterday. Hadn't taken an Uber in a long time. But, of course, the studio blew up, and I had to go use Seb Gorka's studio. And I left it nice. I don't care what anybody says. I left it in good shape. I don't know if Seb was complaining or not. But I had to run over and use that yesterday and took my Uber over there rather than drive. You can't park near Seb's studio because it's all reserved for Seb. Everything is, blocks and blocks are reserved for Seb. Gallagher's got the same way. Gallagher's got a gate around his studio. But I, in my modest little digs, I take my Uber, and the ridership is recovering faster than driver availability, the company said. It and Lyft. Lyft is part of the boycott of Georgia, which was added to by Will Smith yesterday. And Major League Baseball, of course, a blue state sport. Delta and Coca-Cola, the wokest leftist company in America. Don't drink Coke or you're contributing to the People's Revolution, like the Soviet-style 1917 purge. Back to what happened from the Star Tribune. Demonstrators clashed with law enforcement officers in Brooklyn Center for the second night in a row. Protesters have been on hand throughout the day. 300 people attended a separate peaceful vigil for Dante Wright. But shortly before 8 p.m., police began to warn demonstrators, who still numbered in the hundreds, that they were in violation of curfew. Authorities fired multiple rounds of tear gas along with rubber bullets, flash grenades. I've been hit by a rubber bullet when I did the drill with the Marine Corps down at Camp Pendleton. It's not a pleasant thing. If it hit you in the eye, that would be like Ralphie in Christmas Story. Crowd responded the typical way, throwing water bottles and launching fireworks. At a strip police near the station, a group of protesters broke into several small businesses, including a Dollar Tree store, where flames were later spotted. About 40 people were arrested. I just think that's the beginning, but we'll see. I don't think you get a mistrial out of this for Chauvin, but it's possible. Republicans and big businesses, I mentioned, are fighting. D.C. Washington Post reports that facing GOP opposition, Biden seeks to redefine bipartisanship. He's going to redefine it by defining it as only Democrats, because the Republicans are not going along with these tax hikes. Defying Republicans, big companies keep the focus on voting rights. It's the same 100 people having the same conference call, joined by a bunch of woke lawyers in New York. Simpson, Thatcher, Skadden Arps, Aiken, Gump, Crevasse, Swain and Moore, Ropes and Gray, Sullivan and Cromwell, Weil, Gottschall, and Manges, Wachtell, Lipton. And these are all law firms I did not want to work for. My first law firm in 1982 was Baker and Botts, and my second law firm was Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher. And in fact, I'm having lunch today with the original lawyer at Gibson who took care of me, Bill Kilberg. But we'll see whether or not anybody cares what the lawyers think. That's never actually been much of an issue. Let me check the market for everyone, brought to you by Birch Gold. Head over to Hugh Gold. And as I said, inflation is on the rise. You want to get some gold. Head to hughgold.com or text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. Yesterday, the Dow was down about 55 points. The S&P was down. The NASDAQ was down. Don't know what's going to happen today, but Germany is up and France is up and England's off a little bit. Gold, however, is at 1727. It dropped a little bit. It is a great day to buy gold, and you do that by going to hughgold.com. Birch Gold has got thousands of five-star reviews. They will help you roll over a portion of your IRA. I recommend 10%, or just buy gold. Text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747, or visit HughGold.com. Come right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
Now, on the Mike Gallagher Show.
He's made a very big deal about ghost guns, homemade guns, as you said, that cannot be traced. I didn't realize there was a rash of ghost guns used in these high-profile mass killings that Biden referenced. Are they? Are these massacres in Charleston and in Colorado and all these terrible scenes? Are those all with people who made their guns at home?
No, Mike, you're right. These aren't people who have produced their own firearms in their own homes. We're talking about, in many of these instances, are failures of people to either enact on the laws that are available to them, or the authorities who fail to take action when they were supposed to. So if we look at the most recent murders in Boulder, Colorado, we see that Colorado already has red flag laws. We see that the family was already concerned about the mental disturbance of the individual who's accused of these crimes, to the point where they actually took the firearm away from him at one point, and he obviously got that back and committed his heinous crimes. But they could have reached out and they could have used the red flag laws available to them there, and they didn't. We look at the Pulse nightclub shootings. In fact, the FBI knew about that and they didn't act. In fact, that was a terror attack and was not just an indiscriminate killing at a nightclub. If we look at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, we know that the FBI was warned twice. We know that the city, state, and county officials had been warned over 40 times that there was concerns with this individual, and they never acted upon those. So what we're talking about is a failure of the system to actually work in the way it's supposed to, because the people were either too afraid or because authorities didn't act when they were warned to. This is not an issue of so-called ghost guns. And part of the issue is that these are being conflated a lot of times with firearms that show up at a crime scene with the serial numbers obliterated.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
You see, the people that perpetually want more power for themselves, they crisis hop. They hop from one crisis to the other. The environmental crisis, the Chinese coronavirus crisis. A crisis allows you to justify a power grab. There's nothing quite like a crisis that makes you feel more self-important and act like a totalitarian. A crisis generally means that the public will give up their freedoms and liberties. There's something even deeper going on here, though. As the CDC director says racism is a serious public health threat, they are now blending two of their most effective strategies. The fact that Americans will not question the science when it comes from anything from the CDC, despite the fact the CDC has lied to you about basically everything over the last year. The CDC has been wrong about almost everything, contributing to a serious mental health crisis, a suicide epidemic, alcoholism, drug usage, self-worth issues with young people, 40% of small businesses being closed, and the lockdowns did nothing. Let me say that again. The lockdowns did nothing to actually improve the well-being of our country. But the CDC now knows that Americans would rather be safe than free, and that safetyism is the predominant viewpoint in America. And they also know that Americans will not challenge this idea that America is systemically racist. Just won't.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube now today on America First with Sebastian Burka.
Why is it that we have to wait? Is this so often the case for a British tabloid newspaper to report the story of Hunter Biden for anybody to take notice?
Because our media just aren't interested. Our media want to protect the Bidens. They want to protect liberals, most of the media, and they're not honest brokers, right? We knew the contents of this laptop in September and October.
Yeah.
This should have been out and out everywhere. But what do we have instead? Instead, we had the New York Post being blocked from Twitter. Instead, we had CNN and others suggesting that Hunter Biden's own laptop that he signed over was somehow Russian disinformation. Absolute nonsense.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Headline, and I'm quoting, 2 CBS TV executives are fired after one called a black TV anchor just a jive guy, and the other called a female employee an effing idiot. Peter Dunn, president of CBS television stations, and David Friend, senior VP for news at the stations, were ousted on Wednesday. I'm laughing because polls show that 83% of Democrats believe that Donald Trump is a racist. 83%. This guy is calling a black TV anchor just a jive guy while reporting how racist Donald Trump is. Can't make
Welcome back, America. My eyes are burning. My eyes are burning. During the break, I went to the Google-generated ad for Ren Spooner. Now, I love Ren Spooner shirts. Every Californian does, and I used to be a Californian. If you're listening for the first time in Sparta, I live inside the Beltway now, but for 2000 and from 1989 to 2016, I lived in Southern California, and that involves its own hardships. One of them is to have to be around USC fans, and if it ever becomes a degree-granting institution, it's really going to become insufferable. But I went to look. I was lured in to the Ren Spooner site by a Victory in the Pacific Ren Spooner shirt. You know, they had submarines and fighter planes and aircraft carriers and destroyers and battleships and stuff. I said, that would be great for the Navy people in my family. And of course it's great. And the only thing they have left are mediums and smalls. And those are for children, actually. Ren Spooner, there's no better shirt, but you got to get a large or an extra large for a man. And then I said, well, maybe I'll just check the general inventory. Maybe that's a mistake. And the first thing that pops up is the University of Southern California Ren Spooner shirt. It burns my eyes. It really does. You don't know how many of these are. If you walk around a mall in Southern California, if you go to South Coast Plaza or Fashion Island or the West Side Galleria, honestly, I don't think people are allowed to leave the house if they go to USC for a day, or if they're the parent of a USC student, or if their uncle went to USC in the 30s, they wear USC stuff. And you would think that would be accompanied by sports excellence. In fact, it's just sanctions. And you would think that they'd won a game in a bowl sometime in the last 10 years, and that's not the case. And you would think their band had trumpets, and it's going to be an awakening to my friends in Sparta who are probably Vols. My new friends on News Talk 1050, Sparta, Tennessee. The USC band has no trumpets and have not had trumpets. They did a nice thing in the 40s during the war. They melted down their trumpets, and they gave them, and they replaced them with French horns, which they could make out of an alloy that was common. And so they've always been a French horn band, and they don't have trumpets. And some people are embarrassed by that, but then they insist on telling you the story about how patriotic they are. Really, a USC, what a way to start the morning. Okay, so I want to go back to these China stories that I mentioned to you with a question. 1-800-520-1234. We're going to go to war with these people, aren't we? I don't know if it's going to be a war, but there's going to be some sort of conflict. Putin has moved up 80,000 troops to the border where Russia's invaded Ukraine already. They stole Crimea from Ukraine, and they took part of eastern Ukraine, and now they have 80,000 Russian troops on the border. And the Chinese Communist Party keeps sending its planes into the airspace of Taiwan, the independent island. One China, two systems, and one of those systems is democratic and independent of the mainland Chinese Communists, which is committing genocide and repressing Hong Kong. And I'm thinking that Putin and Xi talk to each other, and they say, what do you make of this Biden guy? And they're using translators, and it's pretty tough. But I think you can say clueless in both Chinese and Russian and get it apart. Really, this is the appeasement hour. Now is the time to strike. So China's message to America, we're equal. 1-800-520-1234. You people think I'm a warmonger or I'm just sizing it up the right way? Now, I think we can sink most or all of the Chinese fleet in one day. And they know it and we know it. They haven't got the special stuff we've got. They don't even know what we've got. I only have heard whispers of what we've got. And they know that I know that they know that they know what we've got. And they don't want to have a conflict with us. They talk, the headline is China's message to America, we're an equal now. No, not until you get what we've got. And basically we can take their entire fleet out. And the question becomes, and not the old-fashioned way, although that would be useful, you know, destroyers and depth charges and that kind of stuff is a World War II movie, not the old-fashioned way. We got lots of submarines in the South China Sea. They don't know that they're there. We got lots of ways to take out their fleet. We don't know if we're going to do it. But their message, we're an equal now, that's simply not true. And they know it. We can also shut down all their banks, and they know it. Every cash flow in America. Matt Pottinger made this point on the Nixon seminar, which was held a week ago tonight with Secretary of State Pompeo and National Security Advisor O'Brien. That's both former Secretary of State, former National Security Advisor, and guest Peter Thiel. And they all know it. And they know that they'll get mopped. My only worry is that Kerry is going to go back and trade all of this superiority for, carbon reductions in 2080. Secretary Pompeo was on Fox Business yesterday with Larry Kudlow talking about rejoining the Paris Accords. He said this, cut number 8.
I don't think they should be overly concerned. We're going to keep an eye out.
Sorry, that's Anthony Fauci. I'm beginning to lose it with Anthony Fauci. He was on doing bad talking points. I like him. By lose it, I mean I can't listen to him anymore because he never answers a question. Cut number 9, Mike Pompeo.
This would be an enormous gift to the Chinese Communist Party. You and I looked at this. We looked at this same set of issues about rare earth minerals. We also saw how dirty they were to extract. We saw what an environmental predation takes place inside of China. So if we spike that using U.S. taxpayer subsidies, it would be an enormous gift to the Chinese Communist Party and would work against the other priority that seems to be the Biden team's priority, which is a greener, less carbon polluted planet. This would be a bad idea. It wouldn't work. All these electrical vehicles running around inside of China today are mostly driven by coal-fired power plants. The solution can't be to use American taxpayer resources to prop up the Chinese Communist Party under the guise of a Green New Deal.
Mike, I don't understand. On the one side, they say they want to be tough on China, and they've made, gestures, Blinken, Sullivan, and so forth, even accepting President Trump's tariffs that remain in place. But on the other side, they pull a stunt like this, which would take out our fossil fuels. I'm thinking natural gas, which is a clean burning fuel, and then this emphasis on electric vehicles and charging stations, which is dominated by China. Now, they have to know that, Mr. Secretary, do they not? They have to know this.
Surely they know that, Larry. They know this, too. They know that their Green New Deal imposes an enormous cost on America. And when they rejoined the Paris Climate Accords, that was a gift to the Chinese Communist Party as well. American energy independence, our ability to sell energy around the world. China is enormously dependent on fossil fuels, and yet we're going to flip the switch. We're going to go the other direction. It's inconsistent with their rhetoric. Your point's well taken. We've heard them give some tough language to the Chinese Communist Party. I just hope that their deeds, the actions that they take, don't undermine those words. The Chinese Communist Party will figure this out in a second, and they will drive a truck through that appeasement.
Yeah, appeasement is the word, Secretary Pompeo. He also, by the way, got in a lick on rejoining the Iran deal because, of course, it is appeasement central at the White House. Cut number 10.
You know, they've been so absorbed by this nuclear deal for, since the Obama administration. You saw it when we came into office, when we took the reins and developed the Abraham Accords, which created peace and stability throughout the Middle East. And now they want to go unwind this. I saw today, Larry, an IMF report. There were $126 billion in foreign exchange reserves that the Iranians had in 2018, and by the time we left, it was less than $10 billion. We had denied the regime, the Ayatollah and his kleptocratic buddies, the capacity to foment terror around the world, to build out big militaries, to do all the things that they can do when they have that extra money laying around. And it appears that this administration is determined to go back to that. It's bad for securing American freedom. It's bad for our friends in Israel, and it's bad for our Gulf state allies throughout the Arab world as well.
See, that's the thing, Mike. The president, yourself, Jared Kushner, and others, you all negotiated. You completely changed the map in the Middle East. And you negotiated the Abraham Accords, which brought the Gulf states, the Arab states, to peace with Israel and relations in trade and investment and diplomacy that we haven't had in quite some time. Iran wants to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. We know that. And Iran's biggest backer financially is China. We know that. So aren't the Biden administration, aren't they effectively choosing Iran, China over, let's say, Israel, USA, maybe Israel, USA, and the Gulf states as well?
Larry, they most certainly are. Their theory of the case back in 2013, 14, and 15 was that if we don't take this deal that guarantees the pathway to a nuclear weapon, then we'll be at war. And of course, we proved just the opposite, right? Secretary Kerry had said you can't get peace without solving the Palestinian problem. We demonstrated that wasn't true. We were realistic about the world. We engaged diplomatic across a broad spectrum when we brought these Gulf states together with the Israelis for a security arrangement that benefits Americans all across the country. To go back to that deal would be an enormous regression and an enormous increase in the risk to the United States of America.
Look, this is an appeasement-oriented White House. And appeasement, if you don't know what it is, you're a USC grad, go look up the 1930s. And we are going to have a replay of Stanley Baldwin and Neville Chamberlain out of Joe Biden and John Kerry. And I hope Tony Blinken can assert some authority here. But when you've got your former boss running around the building and calling for virtual climate, can you imagine being sentenced to sit through that Zoom call? There's going to be a virtual climate summit, and it's going to be virtual, and President Xi is going to participate. Sure he is. You betcha. They're going to have a endless loop of President Xi nodding, as I am if you're watching on YouTube. They're just going to sit there and nod and look serious and listen to John Kerry. He'll work in the fact he served in Vietnam somehow. But that is going to be the worst Zoom call ever. Climate change with John Kerry talking for a few hundred hours with like-minded delegates from around the world. Dwayne, you going to watch that? I think that's something you ought to be watching. In fact, we're going to...
I would not watch that with your eyes.
Okay, see, it's not really going to draw much of a crowd. I think we're going to assign Harley because of Harley's jokesterism yesterday. Harley's going to have to watch and write back and edit. Let's get 4 20-second clips, Harley, from the beginning and at 1 hour intervals. John Kerry.
He was pretty funny yesterday.
Yeah, he was pretty funny yesterday, but he's going to enjoy watching the climate summit with John Kerry. That's what Harley gets to do for making a joke. He make a joke, and I would have that sound. If I had my soundboard, I would be able to play that little clip, but I can't. I do have my relief factor, which I point out Seb Gorka did not have with him in the studio, but I keep in my studio because I take it during my show. I'm sure Seb takes it when he gets up in the morning. I carry in Kirkman, Resveratrol, Omega. Now listen, Sparta, Tennessee, News Talk 1050. First time you've heard me. If you are a new listener to the Hugh Hewitt Show, 3 times a day I tell you about it, but in the first hour, I take these 4 pills with my stone cold coffee, because getting a cup of coffee around here would require someone to actually care, and they don't care about their host. And so I take it with my stone cold coffee, and I do so because I got a 6-miler today in the beautiful highways and byways of Virginia, and it's a gorgeous, gorgeous day. It rained a little bit yesterday, but April and May are the months to be in D.C. September and October, 4 months a year. The Beltway, the Delmarva region, best place in the country to live. 4 months out of the year. 4 months. And that's when you need your relieffactor.com. 1995 gets you started. David Drucker is next, America. Stay tuned.
On the Dennis Prager Show.
Well, if I don't quote the Journal of the American Medical Association to substantiate a point I make, then people like you call up and say you have no scientific basis. So if I quote them, oh, Dennis, you're not honest because you don't always trust them. But if I don't quote them, Dennis, you have no.
They said ivermectin was worthless.
Yes, and it will be to their everlasting, death-creating discredit that they did so. That is what I believe.
They're a fraud. They're a fraud.
In this regard, they have been fraudulent.
When they agree with you, then they're
no. There are areas I have no. Okay, on this, on ivermectin. Okay, that's right. I believe it's fraudulent. That is exactly correct, my friend. That is right. Just as I did on inanimate objects spreading the disease. I've turned out right, and I live by it. I'm on ivermectin. Okay, an unbelievably safe thing. That these people prefer to put people on ventilators than give them ivermectin early has created in me a contempt for the Journal of the American Medical Association and the New England Journal of Medicine and the medical profession that I never had before. Better to go on a ventilator than take ivermectin early. These people are killing Americans. There are epidemiologists I have had on this show from Yale and elsewhere who believe that hundreds of thousands of Americans are dead because of the medical profession. I agree with that. That's worse than fraud. That's homicide. Get it?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
I will ask for your reaction to the president's promise that nothing he recommended impinges on the Second Amendment.
Well, he has a very, I guess, unique interpretation of what the Second Amendment is then. If we're looking at the infringement upon the Second Amendment and the government trying to pass any kind of restrictions on that, I certainly think there's an argument to be said that if he's passing the idea that you can no longer build a firearm in your home, which has always been legal in America, even before the founding of our nation, you could build a firearm in your home. If he's now saying you can't do that, well, I would argue that we're looking at an infringement upon Second Amendment rights. If he's talking about reclassifying an entire class of pistols under the National Firearms Act, which would make it so you couldn't possess these firearms unless you submit your photo, you submit your fingerprints, you pay a $200 tax stamp, and undergo extensive background checks through the ATF, and then be put on a government watch list simply for exercising your Second Amendment rights. I think that that's called an infringement upon your rights, and I think that's something that the American public needs to reach out to their members of Congress and remind them that they are the check on the executive branch. The legislative branch then is one of the checks to keep the executive branch within their role and make sure that they're not overreaching.
Which is precisely why Biden wants to use executive orders. He wants to do an end around, and he wants to try to avoid the legislative process.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, especially to Sparta, Tennessee, 1050 News Talk, 1050. Our new affiliate, David Drucker, joins us once a week. He's on the Washington Examiner team, and you see him on Fox News. In fact, you see him all over cable. Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm great, Hugh. Good morning.
Yesterday, Judge David Carter, late last night, got a motion for a preliminary injunction in the homelessness case in California. Going to be a big deal. I mean, a big deal. Not sure you're going to get sent to California, but I hope you get to spend a couple of nights on Skid Row to cover that.
Yeah, look, this is a big story. It could be both a big story in 2022 in the midterm elections, but also, there's a possibility of a recall campaign in California. This has been an ongoing problem there, exacerbated by the pandemic. And either nobody's figured out what to do, or they figured it out and they don't want to do what's necessary to fix this. And this case has been, one of the few things that has the potential to shake things up out there in terms of how homelessness is dealt with. And it's a problem that was bad even in the midst of a really good economy, and it's only gotten worse.
Yeah, plaintiffs have asked the judge to seize all the Proposition 8, Prop Triple HHH. There are billions of dollars in the stimulus money and to go to work. And to appoint a special master. We will see what he does. But you're a Californian. You would stand out a little bit, David. David is known for our new listeners in Sparta, Tennessee, as being something of a dapper dresser. He would stand out on Skid Row a little bit. Drucker, I wanted to talk to you about Sean Parnell. You wrote a story that Selena Zito told me about yesterday that I did not know. Sean Parnell is going to run for the Pennsylvania Senate seat left vacant by the retiring Pat Toomey?
It looks like it. I think what's interesting about this is he has been getting a lot of encouragement from Trump world, but also has a sort of pedigree and background that could be appealing to more traditional-minded Republicans. He's got Donald Trump Jr.'s endorsement in his pocket, ready to go. This is something that I reported on a couple of months ago, or February. It seems like a couple of months. And so he would immediately start with that. He would launch a campaign, and Donald Trump Jr.'s endorsement is probably second best to his father's endorsement. His father would probably hang back, watch the field and see what he wanted to do, but he would have the second most important Trump. And if he can, fix some of the mistakes from his first campaign, and if he can, not so much in a Republican primary, but if he's nominated, if he can overcome the potential challenge of explaining why he opposed certification of Pennsylvania's votes on January 6th, he's a really formidable candidate. And, of course, with a Democrat in the White House, this should be a good year for Republicans to hold a Senate seat in Pennsylvania.
Now, I am wondering about the Trump strategy for the family, because President Trump endorsed Mo Brooks, who's been on. We should just start calling him Senator Brooks because he's going to win. But he didn't endorse in Ohio, and he hasn't endorsed in Missouri. I don't think he's going to endorse Eric Greitens. There's no upside for him there because he doesn't want to endorse. There's only downside for the president endorsing. If he loses one, the myth is broken. So you pick the safe one. Is Laura Trump or Ivanka Trump going to run in either North Carolina or Florida, respectively? I really can't see Ivanka doing that in Florida, but I don't know much about Laura.
Right. So Ivanka's already said no in Florida. The president endorsed Marco Rubio last week. So that one's a done deal. I think North Carolina is the more interesting case because Laura hasn't ruled it out. The polling looks good for her, but there are a lot of capable conservatives that are running in the Republican primary. And I think one of the things we've seen with Trump, and it's in tension with what we think are, his designs to remake the Republican Party and his image, is he doesn't like to endorse in primaries and lose. And he loses on occasion, not often, but he does lose on occasion. So I think when he's looking at an uncertain field like Ohio and an uncertain field like North Carolina, and we don't know yet what's going on in a couple of other key states, I think he likes to hang back and sort of see how things develop so he can either put somebody over the top or just ensure that whoever he's endorsing was going to win anyway, and he can chalk it up as a victory. And part of this is understandable, right? I mean, if you endorse a bunch of people that lose, your endorsement starts to become meaningless and in some cases laughable, and that's the last thing the president wants. And it's very interesting because for Republicans that just want to win general elections, one of the things that they lean on to reassure themselves is that, look, President Trump doesn't want to endorse losers, and therefore he'll probably come around to the same candidate that, for instance, Mitch McConnell thinks should win a primary, because in that regard, they both have the same interest.
Yeah, there is no upside in losing a primary for the president. That is where you lose one or two of those, and then people don't care anymore.
Correct. And, especially for this president, in many regards, he's just not an ideologue. He just wants to win and be perceived as a winner. where, over the years, Hugh, we've covered a lot of conservatives that are willing to, take a flyer in a primary or stake out the unpopular position with a candidate because they're true believers and they're trying to push the party in a certain direction.
Yeah, he is not the club for growth. David Drucker, always a pleasure. Follow him on Twitter, Sparta, Tennessee, and everywhere else. David M. Drucker on Twitter with the Washington Examiner. Coming right back, America, stay tuned. Hour number 2 is Byron York and Admiral Stavridis. Don't do anything except stay right there on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
On America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Well, it's strange, isn't it? It's strange to say, it's Russian disinformation. Then for Hunter Biden in a puff piece interview this week say, it could have, I don't know, I'm not sure if it was mine. It could be Russian disinformation. Boris, if your lawyers are demanding the computers back, doesn't that mean they are Hunter Biden's? Am I crazy there?
You're not crazy, my friend. You're not crazy. You're more rational than Hunter Biden, but you're definitely, you're definitely not crazy. This whole thing is such a joke. Hunter Biden is laughing in the face of Americans with these interviews. Jimmy Kimmel, where he dares to attack Don Jr., while T. Hunter is literally the face of nepotism in America. I mean, this is somebody who is a good-for-nothing failure, who's committed crime after crime. All you have to do is look at the contents of the laptop. And yet he gets to go on CBS this morning. And by the way, talk about collusion, talk about cahoots. Viacom CBS owns Simon & Schuster, which put out the book. And then he goes on CBS to promote it. That's globalism for you in today's economy. Hunter Biden is an affront to the American people. The fact that the truth about him didn't come out during the campaign is a huge failure of mainstream media, but not one that I think they're going to fix anytime soon because they're so in bed with the left.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
AOC in mid-season form. Remember when she said there's no surge at the border because children are not insurgents?
They want to say, what about the surge? Well, first of all, just gut check, stop. Anyone who's using the term surge around you,
gut check, stop.
Consciously is trying to invoke a militaristic frame.
A militaristic frame. Is trying to invoke a militaristic frame. She can sling it, can't she?
And that's a problem because this is not a surge.
It is not a surge. It is more of a...
These are children.
Oh, so therefore it's not a surge.
And they are not insurgents.
Ah, okay. And remember when she had difficulty trying to figure out what a garbage disposal was?
I am told this is a garbage disposal.
I am told. I don't know who told me. I can't reveal the identity, but a whistleblower told me that this is a garbage disposal.
I've never seen a garbage disposal.
I've never smelled a garbage disposal.
I never had one in any place I've ever lived.
I've never fondled one.
I don't know what to use it for.
I don't know whether or not it's alive. It appears to be motionless, but it might be playing possum. It is hard to say.
Or what its purpose is. Like food scraps?
Like food scraps?
I don't know.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Dennis Prager Show.
Joseph in Baltimore, Maryland. Hello.
You admitted on Tuesday that Israel's done the exact opposite of everything you recommended.
Right.
They've had 6,000 deaths. They have 36 times fewer people. 36 times 6,000 is 220,000. They have almost a third the number of deaths we have. From which I would draw the conclusion that everything you recommended is wrong.
Well, how do you answer this? I looked it up, seeing your call. I looked up the list of countries. 150 countries have fewer deaths per million than Israel. So why do you pick Israel versus the U.S. and not Israel versus the 150 countries, 150 that did better than Israel and didn't do what Israel did?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
I will ask for your reaction to the president's promise that nothing he recommended impinges on the Second Amendment.
If he's passing the idea that you can no longer build a firearm in your home, which has always been legal in America, even before the founding of our nation, you could build a firearm in your home. If he's now saying you can't do that, well, I would argue that we're looking at an infringement upon Second Amendment rights. If he's talking about reclassifying an entire class of pistols under the National Firearms Act, which would make it so you couldn't possess these firearms unless you submit your photo, you submit your fingerprints, you pay a $200 tax stamp, and undergo extensive background checks through the ATF, and then be put on a government watch list simply for exercising your Second Amendment rights. I think that that's called an infringement.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
We now have a radical, unproven philosophy, critical race theory, that is running our entire government. The CDC director says racism is a serious public health threat. Quote, a growing body of research shows that centuries of racism in this country has had a profound and negative impact on communities of color. That's not true. It's not true. Read Discrimination and Disparities by Thomas Sowell. Just because there is a disparity does not mean that discrimination is to blame. The fatherless epidemic in the black community is a serious public health threat. You want to know what's keeping black people down? It's not racism. It's government programs, failing public schools, Democrat policies, and the lack of fathers in the home.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Why is it that we have to wait? Is this so often the case for a British tabloid newspaper to report the story of Hunter Biden for anybody to take notice?
Because our media just aren't interested. Our media want to protect the Bidens. They want to protect liberals, most of the media, and they're not honest brokers, right? We knew the contents of this laptop in September and October.
Yeah.
This should have been out and out everywhere. But what do we have instead? Instead, we had the New York Post being blocked from Twitter. Instead, we had CNN and others suggesting that Hunter Biden's own laptop that he signed over was somehow Russian disinformation. Absolute nonsense.
Well, it's strange, isn't it? It's strange to say, it's Russian disinformation. Then for Hunter Biden in a puff piece interview this week say, it could have, I don't know, I'm not sure if it was mine. It could be Russian disinformation. Boris, if your lawyers are demanding the computers back, doesn't that mean they are Hunter Biden's? Am I crazy there?
You're not crazy, my friend. You're not crazy. You're more rational than Hunter Biden. But you're definitely, you're definitely not crazy. This whole thing is such a joke. Hunter Biden is laughing in the face of Americans with these interviews. Jimmy Kimmel, where he dares to attack Don Jr., while T. Hunter is literally the face of nepotism in America. I mean, this is somebody who is a good-for-nothing failure.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt, and greetings especially to our brand new affiliate in Sparta, Tennessee. You will be lucky and happy to know that we have Byron York of the Washington Examiner and Fox News join us most Tuesdays. He is with us this morning. He's just back from the border, and his Washington Examiner story is headlined, "The Border is Even Worse Than You Think." Hello, Byron. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. Doing fine, thanks.
No, I think it's pretty bad. Did you see border czar Kamala Harris when you were down there?
You know, I looked and looked and looked, but she was not there. And it's actually pretty obvious why she is not there, which is if she went, she would draw attention to just enormous failures, one after the other, by this administration. I just think it's no secret that no politician would want to go and take a big group of press with her and say, here, look, we're failing here, and we're failing here, and we're failing here. So,
now, Byron, where did people like to know what a reporter's life is like? Where did you go, and how long did you stay at each of those places?
I went. There was a Republican group led by Representative Steve Scalise that went to the border. It was a quick 2-day trip. Left on Thursday, got back on Friday night. And basically went, and this is a group of 10 Republican House members, had briefings with Border Patrol, with Texas state officials, because they're trying to, I'll explain why they're involved in this, and then went to, this was in, I should say, in McAllen, Texas, and in Mission, Texas, which is one of the worst spots now. And the takeaway from this, the takeaway is the government's response to this incredible surge of illegal border crossers is entirely improvised. I mean, it is totally jury-rigged. They are scrambling to deal with this. And the reason they're scrambling to deal with this is that President Biden, in his first days in office, just threw out the foundation of the way the government deals with migrants with nothing ready to replace it. He just threw out the system, but had nothing to put in its place. And so we went, one of the first stops we went on Thursday night was there's a bridge, and I will butcher the pronunciation of it, the Anzalduos International Bridge. It joins the United States and Mexico. And there's a large underpass on the U.S. side. And the Americans have created this makeshift processing station there. It operates 24/7. A lot of people arrive at night. It's about a mile or a mile and a half from the banks of the Rio Grande. So migrants are left by their smugglers on the bank. They walk through the woods and then around a dirt road with an arrow sign pointing them to the bridge, and they appear out of the darkness. We were there about 11 o'clock or midnight. They just appear out of the darkness, one group after the other, small groups, 4 or 5 people, 2 or 3 adults, often carrying children, really small children or other smaller children walking with them. They arrive, U.S. officials get their rudimentary information. It's just a bunch of benches and fences and porta potties and some medical units. They sit through the night silently. They're exhausted and filthy. They wait for a bus that will take them to the Donna Center, which is this dangerously overcrowded. We've finally seen pictures of it. Dangerously overcrowded detention center in Donna, Texas, nearby. And they'll be stuck there for who knows how many days, maybe a week, maybe 10 days. And then at some point, the government will send them to, the U.S. government will send them to some place in the country, at the McAllen airport. You see small groups of migrants, lots of them, and they have manila envelopes. And on the envelopes, there are some messages printed in English, like, I do not speak English. Can you please help me to get on my plane? And their flight information, and then they're off to someplace in Indiana or someplace in Colorado or someplace in Virginia. And that's how the government is handling this. There was no effort. I never saw any effort to stop anyone from crossing illegally into the United States. The Biden administration is trying only to process this flow as quickly as they can and release migrants into the United States.
Is there any transparency into how it is decided where they are going? I'm actually afraid that some of these people are going into enslavement because, human trafficking, as demonstrated from places as remote as the BBC series Shetland, is worldwide, and people pay thousands of dollars to get to the United States, but then they have to work off the cost of that, and they can set up elaborate networks about who they are alleging is family. Is there any effort made to verify whom they say is family?
We were told, and we specifically asked about this, we were told by officials who probably wouldn't want to be named, that the U.S. officials do not have the resources to do that, and they are not doing it. So in other words, if you come in and you have, you can tell officials that you have relatives or family or a friend who lives at 123 Main Street in Terre Haute, Indiana, they don't really check it out much. They do their best to get you on your way, and I'm just
astonished by this, Byron. I understand the border is a difficult problem because they changed all the messaging, they changed all the agreements, they brought this on the United States. Correct. And they brought it on these poor people. Let's just stipulate that. Once they're here, I do not understand indifference to where they are going because we know how the cartels operate, and we know that many of these people are going into bondage. And the United States is stepping back and saying, we don't care. We just got to get rid of the picture, right?
Yeah, they're just trying to process the flow. And what has happened, when you talk to Border Patrol people, they're law enforcement people, and it's very clear that in their heart of hearts, what they want to do is catch bad guys. I mean, they like the idea of catching smugglers who are trying to bring, bales of marijuana or packs of cocaine into the country. They want to catch bad guys. And what instead, they are being diverted to helping process families, and some of them refer to it as babysitting. Huge percentages of the Border Patrol force is now, instead of securing the border, just trying to process this flow, get people's names, information, and keep them clothed and fed and everything until they could be released into the United States. And meanwhile, by the way, that creates big gaps, which is what Governor Abbott, and I was in Texas this whole time, Governor Abbott of Texas has created something called Operation Lone Star, in which Texas state officials try to fill in some of the gaps of Border Patrol people who aren't patrolling the border, and using state officials to do that because the situation is so bad.
Byron, in the aftermath of the fall of South Vietnam in 1975, I guess it is, Fetching Mrs. Hewitt was a child in Fallbrook at that time in high school and recalls the operation that was staged at Camp Pendleton. There were hundreds of thousands of South Vietnamese who came to the United States and went to Camp Pendleton and were housed in tents and fed by the Marines and placed systematically. We did it with the Mariel boat lift as well. It can be done. If we're going to accept these people, I just don't want people being turned over into human slavery and trafficking, sometimes sex trafficking, sometimes just physical labor and horrific conditions. And if people don't know that's going on, they're just blind to it. It's going on.
In the Vietnam situation, of course, you're describing a United States government effort to actually bring people here. They weren't, arriving in inner tubes on the coast of California. This is something different, and you're not seeing that systematic effort because, again, I cannot emphasize enough, Joe Biden threw out the system, the Remain in Mexico agreement, the asylum agreements with the Northern Triangle countries. He's gutted Title 42. In addition, of course, he promised no deportations for 100 days, and he's stopped the border wall cold. So he's done all of these things, substantive acts and rhetorical acts to attract people here. By the way, it is funny. I would say that the border right now is crawling with Republican lawmakers who are going down there to see what's going on, and there are zero Democrat lawmakers who are trying to find out what's going on.
And very little media. I know my friend Jake Soboroff will eventually get down there because he genuinely does care, but I don't know if the producers at MSNBC will let him go because this is not part of the narrative, and therefore the narrative is not allowed to show it. Byron York, thank you. Follow him on Twitter at Byron York. Come right back.
On the Dennis Prager Show.
Joseph in Baltimore, Maryland. Hello.
You admitted on Tuesday that Israel's done the exact opposite of everything you recommended.
Right.
They've had 6,000 deaths. They have 36 times fewer people. 36 times 6,000 is 220,000. They have almost a third the number of deaths we have. From which I would draw the conclusion that everything you recommended is wrong.
Well, how do you answer this? I looked it up, seeing your call. I looked up the list of countries. 150 countries have fewer deaths per million than Israel. So why do you pick Israel versus the U.S. and not Israel versus the 150 countries, 150 that did better than Israel and didn't do what Israel did?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
I will ask for your reaction to the president's promise that nothing he recommended impinges on the Second Amendment.
If he's passing the idea that you can no longer build a firearm in your home, which has always been legal in America, even before the founding of our nation, you could build a firearm in your home. If he's now saying you can't do that, well, I would argue that we're looking at an infringement upon Second Amendment rights. If he's talking about reclassifying an entire class of pistols under the National Firearms Act, which would make it so you couldn't possess these firearms unless you submit your photo, you submit your fingerprints, you pay a $200 tax stamp and undergo extensive background checks through the ATF, and then be put on a government watch list simply for exercising your Second Amendment rights. I think that that's called an infringement.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
We now have a radical, unproven philosophy, critical race theory, that is running our entire government. The CDC director says racism is a serious public health threat. Quote, a growing body of research shows that centuries of racism in this country has had a profound and negative impact on communities of color. That's not true. It's not true. Read Discrimination and Disparities by Thomas Sowell. Just because there is a disparity does not mean that discrimination is to blame. The fatherless epidemic in the black community is a serious public health threat. You want to know what's keeping black people down? It's not racism. It's government programs, failing public schools, Democrat policies, and the lack of fathers in the home.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Why is it that we have to wait? Is this so often the case for a British tabloid newspaper to report the story of Hunter Biden for anybody to take notice?
Because our media just aren't interested. Our media want to protect the Bidens. They want to protect liberals, most of the media, and they're not honest brokers, right? We knew the contents of this laptop in September and October.
Yeah.
This should have been out and out everywhere. But what do we have instead? Instead, we had the New York Post being blocked from Twitter. Instead, we had CNN and others suggesting that Hunter Biden's own laptop that he signed over was somehow Russian disinformation. Absolute nonsense.
Well, it's strange, isn't it? It's strange to say, it's Russian disinformation. Then for Hunter Biden in a puff piece interview this week say, it could have, I don't know, I'm not sure if it was mine. It could be Russian disinformation. Boris, if your lawyers are demanding the computers back, doesn't that mean they are Hunter Biden's? Am I crazy there?
You're not crazy, my friend. You're not crazy. You're more rational than Hunter Biden, but you're definitely, you're definitely not crazy. This whole thing is such a joke. Hunter Biden is laughing in the face of Americans with these interviews. Jimmy Kimmel, where he dares to attack.
Welcome back, America. John is the best. Have you ever played with John? Never mind. 1-800-520-1234. Let me check markets, brought to you by andrewandtodd.com, our new audience in Sparta, Tennessee on News Talk 1050. You will learn about andrewandtodd.com. They're an office of Sierra Pacific Mortgage. They lend you the money. But it's run by Andrew Del Rey and Todd Avakian. And I went down to the office last month when I was in California. Said hello to everyone. They work round the clock 24/7 to get your loans done. They help you refinance your house. They help you recast your mortgage if you have your original mortgage with them. They can help you refinance or get pre-qualified in this housing market. With the stocks going crazy and inflation looming, the 10-year Treasury this morning is at 1.675%. That's good as long as it's below 1.7, actually 1.85. I'm not too worried. They can pre-qualify you. You'll be armed with a letter when you walk into that house that you just have to buy. You got to have it, your dream house, and there are 20 people lined up. You want to be the person who has a letter from Andrew and Todd in Sierra Pacific that says this borrower can borrow and we will lend them up to $300,000 with 10% down or $500,000 with 5%, whatever your terms are. They will work with you to figure out what the most house that you can afford. They're not going to let you buy too much house and be not only house poor, but house foreclosed. They're expert at this, but you got to call them. 888-888-1172, 888-888-1172. Yesterday, the Dow was down 56 points. The S&P fell just under 1 point, and the NASDAQ was off 50 points. Overseas this morning, France is up, Germany is up, England is down a little bit, Japan went up again 0.75%. We have no idea. It's a morning show where the markets will end up in the United States, so I never give you a market update that says what current prices are because it doesn't make any sense. By the time it's out of my mouth, it can change, and so I don't believe in telling you that, but I do believe in telling you about andrewandtodd.com, andrewandtodd.com. Amazon did go up $7 yesterday, and I'm telling you, it's the only stock I own two stocks. I own Palantir too. I bought some Palantir when I read that it was Peter Thiel's company, and Peter Thiel's one of the smartest people walking around the planet. And so I diversified a little bit because we got the diversification letter from our brokerage account saying you only own one stock, and we generally don't recommend that. And I said, well, it's not, you don't have visibility into what I own, you dummies. But just to get them off my advisor's back, I bought another stock, Palantir, PLTR. So I never look at Palantir. That's a 20-year investment, too. I never sell anything. I don't buy and sell stocks. I'm not one of those people. You're not going to find me at the Reddit Wall Street Bets game board bemoaning the fact that GameStop is down for the 100th day in a row. Or that Apple fell yesterday, or that Amazon went up yesterday, and I certainly don't buy Tesla. Although I must admit, driving to LAX this weekend when I flew back to D.C., there are a whole bunch of Teslas out there. And the fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I were talking about where do you charge them? And apparently you charge them in your garage. Dwayne, do you have a charging station in your garage yet for your scooter?
Well, I have battery chargers for my bikes, yes, but we actually have a BMW X5, which is a hybrid vehicle that also has a electric motor that we do plug into the garage.
Wait a minute, but where do you put your scooters?
I have electric bicycles that are in the garage.
They're in the garage, and so the scooters plug into the wall and then they're charged?
Yes, they're just like a battery charger for a screwdriver, something that you know nothing about either.
So the same charge that works for the scooter works on a BMW?
No, it's a completely different charging system for my bicycles and the
The scooter and the BMW need different plugs.
They both plug into normal wall outlets. I don't know what you're talking about.
You said just that you're contradicting yourself. This is why producers are of no use whatsoever. They've confused my friends in Sparta. That's Dwayne. He came in today, so I wanted you to make sure that you heard him, because it's like a once a week thing. If you used to listen to Rush and you're listening to me now, God rest his soul, may he rest in peace. He had Mr. Snerdley. I've got Dwayne. And Dwayne comes in once a week, and when he does, I want you to know he's here. So he's here today. We got Adam every day, and Ben and Harley most days, but they're like frickin' frack. Stay tuned.
Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Holding in my baby brown libertarian fingers an article from the Daily Mail. This is the headline. Outgoing CNN anchor Brooke Baldwin rails against network about lack of women in leadership, saying, quote, the most influential and highest paid anchors are men, close quote, just months after she was temporarily taken off the air and replaced by Jake Tapper. And it goes on and talks about how she's expected to leave this month. And she gave an interview with Ms. Magazine. I had no idea Ms. Magazine was still being published. Is it still being published? Wow. I should start subscribing. I had no idea. Ms. Magazine, she said, quote, the most influential anchors on our network, the highest paid, are men. My bosses, my executives, are men. The person who oversees CNN Dayside is a man. And my executive producer for 10 years is a man. So I've been surrounded by a lot of men. End of quote. And your complaint is that they smell bad, that they don't shower, they don't put the toilet seat down. What's your complaint? Quote, I know personally I fight for women's stories, but I get told no a lot, and I still manage to do it. End of quote. There's a lot more I need to do outside the walls of this place, close quote. So she's leaving CNN, says CNN is sexist, the same organization that for 4 years referred to President Donald Trump as sexist.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Unlike the history of the United States, we now are guided by the frightened. The frightened make policy. That's the difference. It's the opposite of the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. All right, Joseph in Baltimore, Maryland. Hello.
Hey, Dennis.
Hi.
You admitted on Tuesday that Israel's done the exact opposite of everything you recommended.
Right.
They've had 6,000 deaths. They have 36 times fewer people. 36 times 6,000 is 220,000. They have almost a third the number of deaths we have. From which I would draw the conclusion that everything you recommended is wrong.
Well, how do you answer this? I looked it up, seeing your call. I looked up the list of countries. 150 countries have fewer deaths per million than Israel. So why do you pick Israel versus the U.S. and not Israel versus the 150 countries, 150 that did better than Israel and didn't do what Israel did?
Well, your recommendations were for the
wait, please answer my question. I thought I answered yours. You compare Israel only to the U.S. I compare Israel to all other countries. I think that's more scientifically.
You've admitted yourself that countries that are homogenous, like Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, aren't comparable. You don't compare the United States to South Korea. Israel's in
right, but I didn't. I said 150 countries. They're not all homogenous. Okay, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt.
They gave away all their hydroxychloroquine. They shut down 3 times, and they have one-third the number of deaths we do.
Right, and they would have had a
Therefore,
lot
I would
fewer
say
deaths had they allowed ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
He's made a very big deal about ghost guns, homemade guns, as you said, that cannot be traced. I didn't realize there was a rash of ghost guns used in these high-profile mass killings that Biden referenced. Are these massacres in Charleston and in Colorado and all these terrible scenes? Are those all with people who made their guns at home?
No, Mike, you're right. These aren't people who have produced their own firearms in their own homes. We're talking about, in many of these instances, are failures of people to either enact on the laws that are available to them or the authorities who fail to take action when they were supposed to. So if we look at the most recent murders in Boulder, Colorado, we see that Colorado already has red flag laws. We see that the family was already concerned about the mental disturbance of the individual who's accused of these crimes, to the point where they actually took the firearm away from him at one point, and he obviously got that back and committed his heinous crimes. But they could have reached out and they could have used the red flag laws available to them there, and they didn't. We look at the Pulse nightclub shootings. In fact, the FBI knew about that and they didn't act. In fact, that was a terror attack and was not just an indiscriminate killing at a nightclub. If we look at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, we know that the FBI was warned twice. We know that the city, state,
Welcome back, America, and to my new listeners on AM 1050 News Talk in Sparta, Tennessee. That music means we're joined by Admiral James Stavridis. He is retired United States Navy, former Allied Supreme Commander in NATO, former head of Southern Command. Good morning, Admiral. How are you?
Doing great, Hugh. How's it going?
Good, good, good. Now, I think your book, 2034, is going to continue to sell because of a headline which is in front of me from the South China Morning Post. U.S.-China relations, military tensions continue to rise over Taiwan. And then in the Navy Times yesterday, China's Navy has more ships than the U.S. Does it matter? They have announced a ship fleet size of 360 battle force ships compared to our 297. That's why 2034 is going to continue to sell, Admiral. Your reaction to those two headlines?
I'm worried, and I'll add a third headline, which is over the past weekend, China flew at least 25 combat aircraft over the Taiwan Straits into the aircraft identification zone, the most they have flown since Taiwan started recording it. So this is real. They're putting more and more pressure on Taiwan. And a lot of my friends, senior retired military, active duty military have said, oh, Stavridis, you read a great book, except you got one thing wrong, the date. It's actually going to be much sooner than that. So, yeah, I'm increasingly worried.
There are 80,000 Russian troops on the border of East Ukraine and Crimea, where they occupied under President Obama. I think they sense weakness on the United States side. A call between Xi and Putin saying, organizing dates would not surprise me. What do we do, or what could we do if China attacked Taiwan? There's not much we can do if Russia moves further into Ukraine. There just isn't. There's just not much we can do. What can we do? Can we sink the Chinese fleet?
We can go to combat. We can sink many Chinese vessels. In the process of doing that, we'll also lose some of our vessels. This will be a very difficult fight. Think the Falklands, where our surface ships will be flooding in. They'll be subject to long-range air attacks from land aircraft. I think it would be a bloody battle. Could we actually stop an invasion? I think we probably could, but it's a very narrow margin, Hugh. And don't take my word for it. The commander of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Phil Davidson, testified on this about 3 weeks ago in an open session. And he said he sees the possibility of a Chinese actual invasion of Taiwan in the next 6 years. So again, it's a real scenario. Our planners in Honolulu, where the headquarters of Indo-Pacific Command is located, grapple with this every day. They look at the real intelligence. And I'll close by saying the U.S. needs to decide and move away from what we currently have, which is called a policy of strategic ambiguity, which means, in a nutshell, we're not going to tell China exactly what we're going to do. I think on this one, it's time to strongly consider telling China an armed invasion of Taiwan is not acceptable to the United States. We will go to combat to stop that.
Now, Admiral, there are three big signals that have recently been given. First, Secretary of State Blinken and National Security Advisor Sullivan went to Anchorage and got yelled at and insulted. Then there was a story floated and retracted about our boycotting the Beijing Olympics. And then there was a story floated in the New York Times, had to come out of state, had to be authorized by Secretary Blinken, if I know my New York Times sourcing, suggesting that maybe we have to move away from strategic ambiguity to something, but not doing so. And so I think we have a very tremulous, if I can use that word, new administration that doesn't quite want to go forward. Meanwhile, I have a story that President Xi has announced he's going to go to John Kerry's virtual summit on climate change, which is wholly beside the point, in my view. It's almost counterproductive. How would you communicate the collapse of strategic ambiguity and the embrace of purpose in we will resist, we will assist Taiwan, and we will resist?
I would start by building it from the ground up, Hugh. So in other words, instead of on a Tuesday morning saying that's the end of strategic ambiguity, I would build it up as follows. I would increase the weapons systems capability that we afford to the Taiwanese. I would increase the level of visitors going. So have the new Secretary of the Navy, when you appoint him or her, the first person to go to Taiwan. I would allow Taiwan to display their flag and wear military uniforms if they're military officers when meeting with their counterparts in the United States. I would invite higher level Taiwanese officials. So I would be ratcheting that up. And at the same time, I'd be telling Taiwan through closed doors that, we're looking very seriously at this. The way you approach Taiwan will make a difference. And if China continues, as I think they will, to simply push hard against the Taiwanese, then I think by the time you've built that scaffolding, then you make the announcement. It's probably 6 months to a year from now.
Do the People's Liberation Army Navy know what we can do to them? I mean, do they have an idea of our best weaponry?
Absolutely, and that's probably the reason they haven't invaded the island of Taiwan. They know that we have not only the forward capability with our aircraft carriers, would have to be careful in how rapidly we get them within range of Chinese air, but we're smart. We know how far a Chinese attack jet and a Chinese cruise missile can go. Probably start a little bit further out, send in unmanned systems, cruise missiles, take out, roll back, as the term is, the Chinese air defense, their anti-access air defense systems, A2AD. Then you roll the carriers in. China really doesn't have a good answer to that. What they are doing is two things: cyber, offensive cyber, something we bring out in 2034, and also hypersonic cruise missiles. In other words, it's simply a fancy word for they go 5 or 6, 7 times faster than the current generation. We don't have a good answer for those yet. We're working on both of those sides of the coin as well. That's going to be job one in the Pentagon in terms of weapons procurement.
Now, we have two classes of submarines. One is strategic, one is tactical. The tactical we call attack submarines. Attack submarines do what their name says, they attack. How many of those do you think we have in or around the South China Sea that could strike PLAN targets if they moved on Taiwan?
Well, on day one, we probably, I don't want to get into specific numbers if you don't mind, simply because I know exact numbers and I don't want to try and fuzz them up in my head. Let me say this. The advantage of the U.S. Navy is, as the British said, the sea is one, meaning we can flood the zone, no pun intended on the word flood. We can move a lot of our attack boats in there very quickly. These are magnificent machines of war. They can go 30 plus knots under the ocean. That means you're going to travel almost 1,000 miles a day. We can flood that zone pretty damn quickly and have an awful lot of those attack boats in there. That's key to this strategy as well, because that's an area in which we truly overmatch the Chinese, is undersea warfare technology.
Now, former Deputy Secretary, National Security Advisor Matt Pottinger said on the Nixon seminar last week, a week ago tonight, that we also have the ability through our banking institutions to shutter the Chinese economy, that we can just kill their credit. They depend upon our banking ability. Do you agree with that?
I think that overstates, and if we did that, if we went from trying to kind of bend the relationship with China, which is what we want to do, and I give the Trump administration credit for seeing this looming tower, but we got to kind of bend this relationship without breaking it. Once you break it, you're back into that 1930s scenario where nations are erecting trade barriers, economies are splintering. How'd that work out? Well, it creates a global depression. In other words, Matt's theory of the case, I think perhaps we could initially do that, but the blowback as the global economy kind of craters would land right here in Topeka, Kansas. So we've got to be smart about how we do it. You know, technically, could we simply shut them down? That's, I think, an arguable question. And there's two sides to it. There's kind of an economic side, just closing our markets to Chinese goods. That's a nuclear option. Or there's using cyber to go after their means of production, their deployments. Those are both extremely high-risk options that would elicit very strong responses from China. Down that path doth a war lie. I think we ought to be careful before we jump at an option like that.
Now, an attack on Taiwan, I have been using the analogy to the reoccupation of the Rhineland in the 30s. What do you think of my analogy? That what ought to have happened after the reoccupation of the Rhineland and didn't led to many other things. And if Taiwan were attacked and we did not respond, I believe the same follows. Do you agree with that analysis?
I do. I think it's pretty good, particularly given the cultural aspects of it, the linguistic aspects of it. I think another pretty good analogy to look at is another real world situation that follows that analogy is what's happening in Ukraine. And you know, we used to say during communist times, it is no coincidence, comrade, that XXX. Boy, you got to wonder about the way China is moving aggressively on Taiwan at the same time Vladimir Putin's Russia is moving very aggressively on Ukraine, because that would be a very difficult problem set for the global economy, the global world to grapple with. The one good news in this, I suppose, is I don't think China, which is the more cautious of the two actors, I don't think China is prepared to make that jump either in the immediate future because of the Olympics. They really do want to land that. And then strategically, they're not quite ready to go to full combat with the United States. Unfortunately, I think that moment is, as the book says, 2034, about 10 years from now.
But Admiral, I wonder if my reaction is simply this, that if you're President Xi or President Putin, you're looking at a White House that is perceived, rightly or wrongly, as extremely appeasement-oriented, very reluctant to use force. John Kerry and Tony Blinken, Susan Rice and Joe Biden are not hawks. None of them are hawks. I don't know anything about General Austin. I've never encountered him. What should they do to stop that? I mean, that's the weakest message possible to be messaging.
What the administration should do is three things. One is use the U.S. military, position it forward, get it in what we call in the military, set the table to send a signal. So this is why you're seeing Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers going through the Bosphorus today into the Black Sea. This is why there's an aircraft carrier strike group operating in the South China Sea today. So set the table with the military. Number two, diplomatically send a position of strength. And that is something that has to be done both privately initially, but if you're not getting results, you ratchet that up publicly. And then number three is allies, partners, and friends. Get this out of the channel of U.S. versus China, U.S. versus Russia. Let's get our NATO partners, our Pacific partners together to face these kinds of challenges. I think they're willing to come with us, but I think will be key to getting this thing done, and that means economic sanctions. So there's a military, a diplomatic, and an economic component to standing up to this kind of behavior on the part of China and Russia.
We'll continue to talk about this next week. Admiral James Stavridis, thank you. The book is 2034 if you want a preview of what's ahead, and it's not happy. Thank you, Admiral. Let me remind you as well, ReliefFactor.com. I'm in the ReliefFactor.com studio. There's my ReliefFactor.com bag, which is a mainstay of the Hugh Hewitt Show. And I took it already in the first hour. I remind you right now, $19.95 gets you a 3-week starter pack. You will try it. You will love it. You will continue to use it every day, and you'll feel better every single day. You'll do more activity, more exercise. Got to get it out to the fleet in the Pacific. ReliefFactor.com, coming right back, America.
On the Charlie Kirk Show.
You see, the people that perpetually want more power for themselves, they crisis hop. They hop from one crisis to the other. The environmental crisis, the Chinese coronavirus crisis. A crisis allows you to justify a power grab. There's nothing quite like a crisis that makes you feel more self-important and act like a totalitarian. A crisis generally means that the public will give up their freedoms and liberties. There's something even deeper going on here, though. As the CDC director says racism is a serious public health threat, they are now blending two of their most effective strategies. The fact that Americans will not question the science when it comes from anything from the CDC, despite the fact the CDC has lied to you about basically everything over the last year. The CDC has been wrong about almost everything, contributing to a serious mental health crisis, a suicide epidemic, alcoholism, drug usage, self-worth issues with young people, 40% of small businesses being closed, and the lockdowns did nothing. Let me say that again. The lockdowns did nothing to actually improve the well-being of our country. But the CDC now knows that Americans would rather be safe than free, and that safetyism is the predominant viewpoint in America. And they also know that Americans will not challenge this idea that America is systemically racist. Just won't.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube now today on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Why is it that we have to wait? Is this so often the case for a British tabloid newspaper to report the story of Hunter Biden for anybody to take notice?
Because our media just aren't interested. Our media want to protect the Bidens. They want to protect liberals, most of the media, and they're not honest brokers, right? We knew the contents of this laptop in September and October.
Yeah.
This should have been out and out everywhere. But what do we have instead? Instead, we had the New York Post being blocked from Twitter. Instead, we had CNN and others suggesting that Hunter Biden's own laptop that he signed over was somehow Russian disinformation. Absolute nonsense.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show. That's pretty sobering conversation, but I want you to be aware if you listen to the Hugh Hewitt Show. that what Admiral Stavridis, he's not making this stuff up. All right, this is not a drill. China and Russia are pushing the United States because they understand Joe Biden to be an extremely weak individual who has been, as former Secretary of Defense Gates said, wrong about every major strategic choice for 30 years, and they would blink. Warplanes from the Chinese mainland, Taiwan, and the United States gathered southwest of Taiwan at the same time this week, according to the South China Morning Post, as a U.S. warship transited nearby. The encounter started on Wednesday morning when a U.S. Air Force EP-3 spy plane conducted a 2-hour surveillance flight in an area where the Taiwan Strait meets the South China Sea. The People's Liberation Army Air Force responded by scrambling jets to monitor the situation, while Taiwan dispatched patrol aircraft and put its air defense missile crews on standby. PLA aircraft have been flying over the region, which Taiwan regards as its air defense identification zone, on an almost daily basis in recent months. Also on Wednesday, the U.S. Navy's guided missile destroyer, the USS John McCain, traveled through a stretch of water that separates the Chinese mainland from Taiwan. It was the fourth such transit by a U.S. warship since Joe Biden has become president. On Monday, the PLA's Liaoning Aircraft Carrier Strike Group carried out exercises off the east coast of Taiwan. And on Tuesday, the Teddy Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group entered the South China Sea as part of what the U.S. Navy called its routine operations. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian denied accusations by the U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price that China was intimidating Taiwan, while the island's Foreign Minister Joseph Wu said in an event of a war with Taiwan, Taiwan would fight to the end, as he announced an increase in military spending. We have, of course, taken note with great concern the pattern of ongoing PRC efforts and attempts to intimidate in the region. The United States maintains the capacity, Price said, to resist any resort to force or other forms of coercion that would jeopardize the security or the social or economic system of the people of Taiwan. The Chinese Communist Zhao said the passage of U.S. warships provoke and stir up trouble, sending gravely wrong signals. China won't be found lacking in either will or capacity to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Military commentator, again, this is one of the Chi-Coms, Song Zhongping said that despite the increase in military activity, the chance of an actual clash remain low. These activities have become routine on all sides. Beijing regards Taiwan as part of its sovereign territory. We know that it's not true. Wednesday, the PLA squadron consisted of 8 J-10 and 4 J-16 fighters, 2 KJ-500 early warning aircraft, and a Y-8 anti-submarine plane. The USS McCain earlier transited the Taiwan Strait on March 10th and February 4th, while its sister ships, the USS Wilbur and the USS John Finn, did so on February 24 and March 19. The U.S. Navy said the movement showed America's commitment to free and open Indo-Pacific, and that military aircraft and vessels would continue to fly, sail, and operate internationally. And the Chinese bots immediately flooded that story with comments like, Taiwan is not a country, it is not recognized as a country, it is a breakaway Chinese province, which exists only because of U.S. destabilizing activity, interference, and meddling. So that's what happens whenever a good article shows up that accurately states the tension. Now, you may not know about those tensions, right? They are not covered much. But if you're the President Xi or General Secretary Xi, and you're looking at Joe Biden and John Kerry and Tony Blinken and Susan Rice, Kamala Harris isn't even in this picture. She doesn't count to the Chinese. You are concluding they are even weaker than President Obama was. And that's weak. It's appeasement central right now in the White House. And they need to do what Admiral Stavridis recommended that they do, which is send high-ranking officials. They got to get a SecNav named and confirmed. I think there has been a nominee named. And over to Taiwan, they need to send high-ranking military delegations there. They got to keep the Teddy Roosevelt. They should send a second carrier to the Pacific and have it out there at the same time. And I don't, when the Admiral says he knows the exact number of submarines that are in the region, I'm sure he does, but I hope the Chinese know. I hope the Chinese have an idea of how many that we have. And the defense budget that the Biden team sent up with a paltry nominal increase. They didn't want to be accused of cutting defense spending, so they added like 0.0001% to spending. Is far less than the 6% growth that is needed. The shipbuilding plan, Donald Trump's biggest failure, was in putting holes in the water or a plan on paper. That's because of a series of very weak secretaries of the Navy and SecDefs who didn't care about the Navy, and that's got to change too. No sign that it will. It's up to Congress at this point to step up, and it's a naval battle that's coming. It's not a land battle. Sorry, Army friends, it's not a land battle. I'll be right back. Hour number 3. Senator Cotton, Senator Hagerty join us. We'll talk about this on the next hour of the Hugh Hewitt Show.
On the Dennis Prager Show.
Well, if I don't quote the Journal of the American Medical Association to substantiate a point I make, then people like you call up and say you have no scientific basis. So if I quote them, oh, Dennis, you're not honest because you don't always trust them. But if I don't quote them, Dennis, you have no. You have,
they said ivermectin was worthless.
Yes, and it will be to their everlasting death-creating discredit that they did so. That is what I believe.
They're a fraud. They're a fraud.
In this regard, they have been fraudulent.
When they agree with you, then they're
no. There are areas I have no. Okay, on this, on ivermectin. Okay, that's right. I believe it's fraudulent. That is exactly correct, my friend. That is right. Just as I did on inanimate objects, spreading the disease. I've turned out right. And I live by it. I'm on ivermectin. Okay? An unbelievably safe thing. That these people prefer to put people on ventilators than give them ivermectin early has created in me a contempt for the Journal of the American Medical Association and the New England Journal of Medicine and the medical profession that I never had before. Better to go on a ventilator than take ivermectin early. These people are killing Americans. There are epidemiologists I have had on this show from Yale and elsewhere who believe that hundreds of thousands of Americans are dead because of the medical profession. I agree with that. That's worse than fraud. That's homicide. Get it?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
I will ask for your reaction to the president's promise that nothing he recommended impinges on the Second Amendment.
Well, he has a very, I guess, unique interpretation of what the Second Amendment is then. If we're looking at the infringement upon the Second Amendment and the government trying to pass any kind of restrictions on that, I certainly think there's an argument to be said that if he's passing the idea that you can no longer build a firearm in your home, which has always been legal in America, even before the founding of our nation, you could build a firearm in your home. If he's now saying you can't do that, well, I would argue that we're looking at an infringement upon Second Amendment rights. If he's talking about reclassifying an entire class of pistols under the National Firearms Act, which would make it so you couldn't possess these firearms unless you submit your photo, you submit your fingerprints, you pay a $200 tax stamp and undergo extensive background checks through the ATF, and then be put on a government watch list simply for exercising your Second Amendment rights. I think that that's called an infringement upon your rights. And I think that's something that the American public needs to reach out to their members of Congress and remind them that they are the check on the executive branch. The legislative branch then is one of the checks to keep the executive branch within their role and make sure that they're not overreaching.
Which is precisely why Biden wants to use executive orders. He wants to do an end around, and he wants to try to avoid the legislative process, because the legislative process is ultimately the way the American people can push back against restrictions, constitutional restrictions like this.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Carol Platt-Liebau for townhall.com. Calling new Biden legislation an infrastructure plan is like calling a shark a dolphin. They both may have dorsal fins, but you mistake one for the other at your peril. Don't be fooled. Only 5% of the bill's spending would actually go for roads and bridges, what normal people think of as infrastructure. Add in items like Amtrak and broadband, and you're still only at 30% of the eye-popping total of $2.3 trillion. And you're supposed to pay for all of this with the biggest tax increase since 1968. Here's what's worse. The bill is actually about leftist social engineering. It would end right to work, something the left hates because it guarantees no one can be forced to join a union or pay union dues in order to hold a job. Ending it offers a rich new source of campaign contributions for Democrats. Calling a shark a dolphin doesn't make it one. I'm Carol Platt-Liebau.
Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
Woodrow Wilson was more concerned with his legacy than what was right for America. He believed the founding fathers were misled. He was the first president in American history to actually philosophically and politically challenge the beliefs of the founding fathers. Woodrow Wilson and Joe Biden are very similar. They care about a radical restructuring and redefinition of America, and I'm going to say something controversial that I have not said publicly. You ready for this? Joe Biden is governing much more radically than Barack Obama. Let me say that again. Joe Biden is governing much more radically. Is that the right way to say it? Much more radically? I guess that's correct. Just doesn't sound right. He's governing more radically than Barack Obama. One of the main reasons is because the people behind him are growing impatient. And they're starting to smell and taste victory. Cut 86, MSNBC analyst, says it himself. Play Cut 86.
Just trying to push forward. So that's a big thing, a paradigm kind of shift. Maybe, I know we've been talking about this for several weeks here, the Roosevelt era to the Reagan era. Are we on the verge of a new activist, progressive era led in an unlikely way by Joe Biden? I think that's not impossible.
Not impossible. MSNBC starting to get excited. Joe Biden is doing more for the anti-American cause in America than any person that has been in office recently.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube now today on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Well, it's strange, isn't it? It's strange to say, it's Russian disinformation. Then for Hunter Biden in a puff piece interview this week say, it could have, I don't know. I'm not sure if it was mine. It could be Russian disinformation. Boris, if your lawyers are demanding the computers back, doesn't that mean they are Hunter Biden's? Am I crazy there?
You're not crazy, my friend. You're not crazy. You're more rational than Hunter Biden, but you're definitely, you're definitely not crazy. This whole thing is such a joke. Hunter Biden is laughing in the face of Americans with these interviews. Jimmy Kimmel, where he dares to attack Don Jr., while T. Hunter is literally the face of nepotism in America. I mean, this is somebody who is a good-for-nothing failure, who's committed crime after crime. All you have to do is look at the contents of the laptop. And yet he gets to go on CBS this morning. And by the way, talk about collusion, talk about cahoots. Viacom CBS owns Simon & Schuster, which put out the book. And then he goes on CBS to promote it. That's globalism for you in today's economy. Hunter Biden is an affront to the American people. The fact that the truth about him didn't come out during the campaign is a huge failure of mainstream media, but not one that I think they're going to fix anytime soon because they're so in bed with the left.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
AOC in mid-season form. Remember when she said there's no surge at the border because children are not insurgents?
They want to say, what about the surge? Well, first of all, just gut check, stop. Anyone who's using the term surge around you,
gut check, stop,
consciously, is trying to invoke a militaristic frame.
A militaristic frame is trying to invoke a militaristic frame.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada, and a special hello to Sparta, Tennessee, a brand new affiliate, 1050 News Talk in Sparta. Sparta, I've got your United States Senator joining me now, Senator Bill Hagerty from the great volunteer state. Senator, welcome. It's good to have Sparta join our affiliates. We're all over Tennessee now. We've invaded Tennessee.
Popular in Tennessee. Sparta is a great city and the greatest state in the nation. So I'm delighted that you got another affiliate there. You continue strong in our home state.
It's pretty close to Nashville, I see. I don't know how the signal goes, but I know we pick up the 40, which is good. I love getting the interstates. I love picking those up.
Yeah.
Senator, I want to cover two things with you. First, you and Tom Cotton, who's on a little bit later, have gotten a bunch of other senators to join in sending a letter to Christopher Wray, which I'm looking at April 13th, asking him to conduct an investigation into Dr. Colin Kahl, spelled C-O-L-I-N, capital K-H-L, who is nominated to be the Undersecretary of Defense, which is the number 3 job at the Pentagon. Why do you want the FBI to investigate Dr. Kahl?
This is something that didn't come up earlier in his hearings, but something that we uncovered, and it has to do with his unauthorized disclosure of sensitive and classified information. If you think about the seriousness of this, the gravity of the position that he seeks to hold, it's the number 3 position in the Pentagon, Hugh. When I was U.S. Ambassador to Japan, I dealt with a person in the previous administration that had that position on highly confidential situations, national security situations on a regular basis. The person that holds this job is going to have to be someone who completely understands and appreciates the important nature of sensitive information. And the type of information that it appears he's disclosed is the kind that would have to be dealt with in the most discreet manner, covered, carried only by the most secure means of courier. And here he is putting it out on Twitter. It really seems to you like there's a different standard if you're Hillary Clinton or Colin Kahl than if you were, say, another member of the administration in a Republican administration. We need to get to the bottom of this.
Have you heard back from Director Wray?
He just received the letter this morning, so I have not heard back yet, but I'm certain that he will take this very seriously. This is the kind of thing that would prevent a person from getting a security clearance. And you probably saw this over the weekend, Hugh, but the new UN ambassador to our United States UN ambassador, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, chief of staff, had to step aside because her security clearance was revoked for disclosing sensitive information. And her actions pale in comparison to what Kahl has done. Kahl went up on Twitter to disseminate this information that we're concerned about.
Now, are you sure it's classified, Senator? Do you believe that what he put on Twitter genuinely is classified?
That's why we want to have a full investigation. It certainly appears that way to me. As I mentioned, as U.S. Ambassador to Japan, I was a member of the previous administration. I regularly dealt with information of this type. And if you look at what he disclosed, I mean, the one that strikes me most personally, Hewitt, is what he talked about with North Korea. I mean, I was U.S. Ambassador to Japan while the situation with North Korea was raging. And in December of 2017, you remember North Korea had launched 2 intercontinental ballistic missiles over Japan at that point. We have 250,000 Americans in Japan. The largest contingent of U.S. military anywhere outside the United States is based there in Japan. Kim Jong-un is launching missiles over Japan, and here's Cole's tweet. He says, he's talking about a report of what's happening in the White House as we're considering military options. Cole tweets out on December 20th, this report should be taken very seriously. Quote, here's his quote, there's a contingent at the White House that believes a limited strike is viable, and the U.S. can control escalation by threatening regime change if Kim Jong-un retaliates. Very dangerous thinking. That is our military posture with respect to a very hot situation. This needs to be investigated very closely. He's putting this on Twitter.
I will continue that conversation with Senator Cotton as well. But while I have you, Senator Hagerty, I want to take up your expertise as ambassador to Japan. I just talked with Admiral Stavridis about what would follow a Chinese attack on Taiwan, and it's not pretty. But a senior Japanese diplomat had occasion to tell me fairly recently that if Taiwan is attacked, the Senkaku Islands would fall soon thereafter. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that the behavior of China is most evident in Taiwan right now. Their incursions on Taiwanese airspace are regular. It's very similar to what the Chinese are doing in the Senkaku Island. It's all in the same general vicinity. So I appreciate the Japanese concern. I think we all are very concerned about what's happening in Taiwan, and I think the U.S. is going to stand strong. I've been pleased with the Biden administration's posture on it.
Why are you pleased? Because I have not seen, I know they're running the McCain between Taiwan and China, and I know that we have done other things, but I've also seen some incredible signals of weakness, such as the non-response to Anchorage, where the insults from the Chinese emissary were numerous and public.
Yes.
I saw a couple of stories floated about boycotting the Olympics, and then they were pulled back. I saw a story float about pulling strategic ambiguity away and actually substituting in strategic clarity about our intent to defend, if necessary, by force Taiwan. I'm not really encouraged by Team Biden, Senator.
Well, I think they started out on a bad footing, particularly with respect to China. If you think about it, they pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord. I mean, China has no obligations to this for decades, and it immediately puts us at a disadvantage. Then they canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. Where's that oil going to go? It's going to go from Canada straight over to China, lowering their production costs. China's laughing all the way to the bank on this. And we saw what happened, as you mentioned, in Alaska, where China took a position, I think, that was very insulting. I don't think that our diplomatic team should have even taken an open meeting like that with media there, and they should have they should have just stepped up and walked away. I think that was very, very difficult. But with respect to Taiwan, I think that the Biden administration is taking a very hard look at our posture there. And I've been, as I said, I've been encouraged by the presence of our military, our Navy in the area, and I hope we continue to send a strong message to the Chinese that we're not going to tolerate their incursions in Taiwan.
Senator,
Admiral
if they
Davis is
attack
just out there.
If they attack Taiwan, would you expect us to sink all or most of their fleet?
I think there should be a response that would be of like kind. And depending on what the action is, I think we should take an appropriate and deliberate response that definitely shows our resolve to support and protect Taiwan.
Well, I have used the analogy to the Rhineland in the 30s, and when Germany reoccupied Rhineland, and as Admiral Stavridis said, there's a certain parallel there because of the ethnic similarities between a portion of the Taiwanese population, a portion of the mainland population, and that was, of course, the Reich's excuse in the 30s to take back the Rhineland. Does that mean an actual war if they invade that?
Well, an invasion is an act of war, and I think we will have to evaluate the circumstances as they evolve. But we have treaty obligations, and we have global expectations from our allies, Hugh. We've got to stand strong at a point in time when this administration is being tested at every turn.
Well, that brings me. Don't we need a clear statement that this means war? Because that's what we didn't do in the 50s in North Korea, and we ended up with an invasion. I mean, in the 40s, with Acheson leaving Korea out of our security statement, and Stalin read that as being, oh, they won't care. But yeah. So, do we think is Taiwan under our global security protection?
Well, this is an issue that I know the administration is wrestling with right now, and I've had discussions with Secretary Blinken on this matter. I think that the posture there is evolving as the situation evolves, and I'm going to continue to track it very closely.
You know, Putin's got 80,000 troops on the Ukraine border. They're flying incursions over Taiwan. It's not that hard to imagine they're coordinating this.
You know, the neighborhood is very challenging. You and I have talked about this before. That's the reason we have more U.S. military stationed in Japan than any place else in the world, because you've got North Korea, Russia, and China right there at your doorstep. And they are, again, I think, testing this administration at numerous turns. And we've got to stand strong and be diligent and make certain that they understand, they meaning North Korea, Russia, China, that we're going to stand with our allies, we're going to abide by our treaties, and we're not going to tolerate this behavior.
Technical question, Senator, going back to your ambassadorial days. Can planes that the United States has forward stationed, not the carrier that they have there and the carriers we dispatch or the submarine, but planes that are on the ground in Japan, can they reach China?
That's something that we never discuss in terms of our military capabilities, Hugh. And I think we have a very strong posture in Japan, I'll say that, stronger than any nation in the world. But
that's interesting. We've never disclosed. We've never disclosed what aircraft we have there and its range.
I think if you even try to find out the pace and the speed at which our ships move, it'd be very difficult to get that information.
Well, I guess that's reassuring, but I was wondering if we had any F-22s there, but I'm hearing you telling me we wouldn't disclose it if we did.
I'd prefer not to be in that discussion right now, given the sensitive nature of the information.
All right, Senator Bill Hagerty, good to talk to you. I think your call letter is important. I'll continue the conversation with Senator Cotton when he arrives a little bit later in the hour. Don't go anywhere, America. I appreciate the senator, and I appreciate Sparta 1050 News Talk. That's why we do this throughout Tennessee and the South, Atlanta, North Carolina, Florida. We're all over the Southeast. Actually, we're all over the country. Stay tuned, America. You're listening to the news that matters when it breaks, news that you need, analysis that you want on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
On the Charlie Kirk Show.
Woodrow Wilson was more concerned with his legacy than what was right for America. He believed the founding fathers were misled. He was the first president in American history to actually philosophically and politically challenge the beliefs of the founding fathers. Woodrow Wilson and Joe Biden are very similar. They care about a radical restructuring and redefinition of America, and I'm going to say something controversial that I have not said publicly. You ready for this? Joe Biden is governing much more radically than Barack Obama. Let me say that again. Joe Biden is governing much more radically. Is that the right way to say it? Much more radically? I guess that's correct. Just doesn't sound right. He's governing more radically than Barack Obama. One of the main reasons is because the people behind him are growing impatient. And they're starting to smell and taste victory. Cut 86, MSNBC analyst, says it himself. Play Cut 86.
Just trying to push forward. So that's a big thing, a paradigm kind of shift. Maybe, I know we've been talking about this for several weeks here, the Roosevelt era to the Reagan era. Are we on the verge of a new activist, progressive era led in an unlikely way by Joe Biden? I think that's not impossible.
Not impossible. MSNBC starting to get excited. Joe Biden is doing more for the anti-American cause in America than any person that has been in office recently.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Well, it's strange, isn't it? It's strange to say, it's Russian disinformation. Then for Hunter Biden in a Puff Piece interview this week say, it could have, I don't know. I'm not sure if it was mine. It could be Russian disinformation. Boris, if your lawyers are demanding the computers back, doesn't that mean they are Hunter Biden's? Am I crazy there?
You're not crazy, my friend. You're not crazy. You're more rational than Hunter Biden, but you're definitely, you're definitely not crazy. This whole thing is such a joke. Hunter Biden is laughing in the face of Americans with these interviews. Jimmy Kimmel, where he dares to attack Don Jr., while T. Hunter is literally the face of nepotism in America. I mean, this is somebody who's a good-for-nothing failure, who's committed crime after crime. All you have to do is look at the contents of the laptop. And yet he gets to go on CBS this morning. And by the way, talk about collusion, talk about cahoots. Viacom CBS owns Simon & Schuster, which put out the book. And then he goes on CBS to promote it. That's globalism for you in today's economy. Hunter Biden is an affront to the American people. The fact that the truth about him didn't come out during the campaign is a huge failure of mainstream media, but not one that I think they're going to fix anytime soon because they're so in bed with the left.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
AOC in mid-season form. Remember when she said there's no surge at the border because children are not insurgents?
They want to say, what about the surge? Well, first of all, just gut check, stop. Anyone who's using the term surge around you,
gut check, stop,
consciously is trying to invoke a militaristic frame.
A militaristic frame. Is trying to invoke a militaristic frame. She can sling it, can't she?
And that's a problem because this is not a surge.
It is not a surge. It is more of a...
These are children.
Oh, so therefore it's not a surge.
And they are not insurgents.
Ah, okay.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Let me check markets for you, brought to you by andrewandtodd.com on this Tuesday morning. andrewandtodd.com, that's where you go, answer a couple of questions. They'll tell you how much you can borrow from the house you already own or how much house you can afford to buy if you are in the market for a house, and you should be if you've got the ability, because nothing's going to get cheaper. Nothing is going to get cheaper in the United States in the near term for the next year and a half. It's just going to get more and more and crazier, more expensive, because they're not building any houses anywhere near the demand. And as a result, there's a lot of money flooding into the system, another $2 trillion following $4 trillion last year. We've never seen anything like this. I'm 65 years old. We've never had this kind of stimulus in the history of the United States. And therefore, just expect wild housing inflation to continue for as long as, houses don't make the market anymore. I talking to the guy yesterday who came and the garbage disposal died while I was away from the Beltway in California. And so my friend came over to install a new garbage disposal yesterday. For some reason, they didn't trust me to do that. And I would have been happy to do it myself. I'm sure those of you who've listened to the show for a long time know that I'm just able, very, very handy. And so we were talking about his business is getting our friend, the realtor, Gordon Wood in Northern Virginia. He works for Gordon, who sold me this house years and years and years ago. And Gordon has this guy fix up houses that are going on the market. And he barely had time to come put in a garbage disposal because this guy does nothing but fix up houses which never make it to market. They get sold before they make it to market. That means you've got to be pre-qualified. If you even get a whisper of a house hitting the market where you want to buy, you've got to take your letter in and say, here I am, I'm pre-qualified. Or if you want to get money out of your house because you not only can your home price go up, but you can take the equity out of your house and put it into the market, into an index fund or something that's relatively safe. Nothing is ever guaranteed, but I don't know that inflation in home prices can keep up with inflation in the market with this kind of stimulus. andrewandtodd.com, or call them at 888-888-1172. 888-888-1172. Yesterday, the Dow went down 55 points. The S&P went off about 0.81, less than a point. The NASDAQ was off 50. I never tell you what's going to happen today because I don't know what's going to happen today. I'm neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet. But the markets in France and Germany were up. England was off a little bit. Gold is at 1729. The 10-year Treasury is at 1.675. You can still get the greatest low interest rates ever. History of rates. Never been this low, not ever going to be this low. My number is 1-800-520-1234. The brand new news this morning is that U.S. calls for a pause on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine after clotting cases. So that's not good news. And my son got Johnson & Johnson. He's fine. It involves a very rare disorder involving blood clots within 2 weeks of vaccination. 6 recipients were women between the ages of 18 and 48. 1 woman died. A second woman in Nebraska had been hospitalized in critical condition. Now understand, 6 cases, 7 million people in the United States have received Johnson & Johnson shots. 9 million more doses are out there. I do not understand pausing. As Dr. Peter Marks said, we are recommending a pause in the use of this vaccine out of an abundance of caution. And I just don't understand it. 6 cases out of 7 million doses. I mean, how many people are going to have a blood clot anyway out of 7 million people? And that is going to have, I report the news. I don't hide the news. I don't try and bend people's reaction. I'm not like, that's where public health took a big hit this past year when they admitted to trying to manipulate people's reactions. I just tell you the facts. 6 cases out of 7 million shots related in blood clots. 1 person died. 1 out of 7 million. Guess what? If you're on the 405 right now in California because you got to jump on traffic, or you're driving around the Beltway in Virginia, you're at more risk than you would be from a Johnson & Johnson blood clot. Go get the vaccine, America. They won't give you Johnson & Johnson today. That's going to screw up everything. I honestly, FDA, what are you thinking? I'll be right back. Senator Cotton joins me next on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
AOC in mid-season form. Remember when she said there's no surge at the border because children are not insurgents?
They want to say, what about the surge? Well, first of all, just gut check, stop. Anyone who's using the term surge around you,
gut check, stop.
Consciously is trying to invoke a militaristic frame.
A militaristic frame. Is trying to invoke a militaristic frame. She can sling it, can't she?
And that's a problem because this is not a surge.
It is not a surge. It is more of a...
These are children.
Oh, so therefore it's not a surge.
And they are not insurgents.
Ah, okay. And remember when she had difficulty trying to figure out what a garbage disposal was?
I am told this is a garbage disposal.
I am told. I don't know who told me. I can't reveal the identity, but a whistleblower told me that this is a garbage disposal.
I've never seen a garbage disposal.
I've never smelled a garbage disposal.
I never had one in any place I've ever lived.
I've never fondled one.
I don't know what to use it for.
I don't know whether or not it's alive. It appears to be motionless, but it might be playing possum. It is hard to say.
Or what its purpose is. Like food scraps?
Like food scraps?
I don't know.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Joseph in Baltimore, Maryland. Hello.
You admitted on Tuesday that Israel's done the exact opposite of everything you recommended.
Right.
They've had 6,000 deaths. They have 36 times fewer people. 36 times 6,000 is 220,000. They have almost a third the number of deaths we have. From which I would draw the conclusion that everything you recommended is wrong.
Well, how do you answer this? I looked it up, seeing your call. I looked up the list of countries. 150 countries have fewer deaths per million than Israel. So why do you pick Israel versus the U.S. and not Israel versus the 150 countries, 150 that did better than Israel and didn't do what Israel did?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
I will ask for your reaction to the president's promise that nothing he recommended impinges on the Second Amendment.
if he's passing the idea that you can no longer build a firearm in your home, which has always been legal in America, even before the founding of our nation, you could build a firearm in your home. If he's now saying you can't do that, well, I would argue that we're looking at an infringement upon Second Amendment rights. If he's talking about reclassifying an entire class of pistols under the National Firearms Act, which would make it so you couldn't possess these firearms unless you submit your photo, you submit your fingerprints, you pay a $200 tax stamp, and undergo extensive background checks through the ATF, and then be put on a government watch list simply for exercising your Second Amendment rights. I think that that's called an infringement.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
We now have a radical, unproven philosophy, critical race theory, that is running our entire government. The CDC director says racism is a serious public health threat. Quote, a growing body of research shows that centuries of racism in this country has had a profound and negative impact on communities of color. That's not true. It's not true. Read Discrimination and Disparities by Thomas Sowell. Just because there is a disparity does not mean that discrimination is to blame. The fatherless epidemic in the black community is a serious public health threat. You want to know what's keeping black people down? It's not racism. It's government programs, failing public schools, Democrat policies, and the lack of fathers in the home.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Why is it that we have to wait? Is this so often the case for a British tabloid newspaper to report the story of Hunter Biden for anybody to take notice?
Because our media just aren't interested. Our media want to protect the Bidens. They want to protect liberals, most of the media, and they just aren't there.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening this morning. Joined by United States Senator Tom Cotton from the state of Arkansas. Good morning, Senator Cotton. Welcome.
Good morning, Hugh. It's good to be back on with you.
I want to begin where I left off with Senator Hagerty. You and he jointly authored a letter to Christopher Wray, head of the FBI, concerning Colin Kahl. For the benefit of those who've tuned in since Senator Hagerty was on, why did you send it? What do you expect to hear back from the FBI, and when?
Colin Kahl is Joe Biden's nominee to be the number 3 official in the Department of Defense. But Hugh, he has a long history of injudicious, unhinged statements, not simply about left-wing policies, but about anyone who disagrees with those policies, to include Democrats. I don't think he has the temperament to be the number 3 official in the Department of Defense. What Senator Hagerty now highlighted is that he also appears to have mishandled classified information very early on in the Trump administration. He appears to have used his position as Joe Biden's national security advisor when Joe Biden was vice president to release sensitive information from inside National Security Council deliberations. So we have urged Christopher Wray to do a rapid investigation of this matter before the Senate considers his nomination. This nomination is so divisive and so partisan that it came out of the Armed Services Committee a couple weeks ago on a party line vote. So he obviously has very minimal support, if any, in the Senate among Republicans. I'm not even sure he has the Democrats' support to get confirmed. But if it does turn out that he mishandled classified information for partisan purposes to attack Trump administration officials, I think this nomination will be done.
Is there a hold on the nomination right now so that it may not proceed to a final vote?
Not exactly, Hugh, because of the unusual nature of the 50-50 Senate and the split decision in the Armed Services Committee. There actually has to be what's called a motion to discharge the nomination of the Armed Services Committee, which is separate and apart from the motion to either start debate on the nomination or the confirmation vote. That hasn't happened often. Most nominees get at least 1 or 2 Republicans in committee to support it. So as it stands now, there would have to be a motion to discharge the nomination from committee, and that'd be followed by a few hours of debate and vote. So until we have that motion, we don't even have the nomination on the floor, and that's why we've urged Christopher Wray to move promptly.
Is there a procedure by which that motion is followed that will give you an early alert? Because and is it subject to filibuster, or is that a simple majority motion to discharge?
All the motions all motions and votes dealing with nominations here are simple majority, but yes, we will have advance notice of it because I think under the agreement that was worked out on the 50-50 Senate power sharing arrangement back in January is that the motion to discharge gets, I believe, 4 hours of debate. So they have to file a motion, there has to be debate on it, and we have to vote on it. So this is not something that Schumer can just walk to the Senate floor and call up for a vote. So we'll know if there's going to be a vote. And frankly, if it's a 50-50 split and even one Democrat says that they want to get the results of FBI review of this matter, then they can't move to discharge it either. And I would suspect that someone like Bob Menendez, who both opposed the Iran nuclear deal that Colin Kahl is the most virulent defender of, and who was on the receiving end of some of Colin Kahl's unhinged, imbalanced comments, might want to see the results of an FBI review as well.
Oh, really? He attacked Senator Menendez?
He attacks anyone who doesn't want to surrender to Iran, or anyone who thinks that it's important the United States show no daylight in our alliance with Israel. Colin Kahl, again, is an unbalanced, intemperate choice to be the number 3 official in the Pentagon. We're not talking about like the guy that's going to run the Census Bureau or run the Office of Personnel Management, no offense, Hugh. We're talking about someone who's going to be the number 3 official in the Department of Defense. I asked him about these comments. Some of these comments he released at like 1 o'clock in the morning. I mean, do we really want someone who's sitting around on their couch, presumably at home, reading the news and unleashing unhinged statements to be the number 3 official in the Pentagon? And he said that, well, he got caught up in the moment and passions were running high. It's like, look, if you think passions are running high at midnight when you're sitting on your couch reviewing your news feed, what are you going to do when you're sitting in the Pentagon and China is about to invade Taiwan?
Yep. Okay. Now, Senator, let me move to that very subject because I discussed it at length with Senator Hagerty and last hour with Admiral Stavridis, the idea that China may attack Taiwan. I never really considered that as a possibility until in the last couple of years, but the last couple of weeks have seen numerous incursions of Chinese warplanes into Taiwan airspace. They've seen the Chinese send their aircraft carrier between Japan and Okinawa, and they've seen we transit our destroyers, including the John McCain, is in that channel between Taiwan and mainland China today as we speak. The opportunities are growing for a miscalculation or an outright attack. What would be the United States response, or ought to be the United States response, to any attack on Taiwan, Senator Cotton?
Well, so first, Hugh, let's set the table a little. You are correct that China has probed and conducted feints and reconnaissances in force over the last several weeks to a degree we have not seen before from China. This is so dangerous because it will deprive Taiwan and the United States and our allies of any kind of early warning. That's probably exactly why China wants to do it. If we all become kind of inured to 25 Chinese aircraft flying the Taiwanese airspace every day and then returning to their base, we might miss the day when they don't return to their base, but they start dropping ordnance on Taiwanese military bases. Furthermore, the loss of Taiwan, should China invade Taiwan and annex it to the mainland, would be truly catastrophic for the United States and for international peace and stability. It would be akin, Hugh, I think, to perhaps saying when Nazi Germany remilitarized the Rhineland in 1936 and France and Great Britain stood by.
Exactly the analogy I used with Admiral Stavridis, and he agreed. It would be the Rhineland all over again.
Yeah. So one, it would show that the United States does not have the resolve and the political will to deter our chief adversary from invading a democratic partner of ours, a country to whom we've been deeply committed since the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act. Second, it would give Taiwan total control over the South China Sea. They have already exerted.
You mean China? You mean China?
Yes, to give China, Red China, not Free China, total control over the South China Sea. They've already exerted a significant degree of control by building islands in the middle of South China Sea and militarizing them on the Obama-Biden administration's watch. But Taiwan sits at the choke point on the northern end of the South China Sea, a sea through which more than 40% of the world's global commerce travels. They would be able to exert their total control over the South China Sea. Furthermore, that would give them naval bases outside of the so-called first island chain of Japan and Taiwan and the Philippines and a few other places that allows them to project naval power more easily all around the world. And then finally, and this is truly an example of remilitarizing Iran, which was an industrial heartland in Western Europe, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company is one of the most important companies in the world. They make 80 to 90% of the world's advanced chips. If mainland China annexes Taiwan, that means that they will then have a chokehold on the world's supply of advanced semiconductors. And you're seeing what that means for Americans right now in the slowdown that you see at automobile factories, of factories being idled because we don't have enough of those chips to even make automobiles, much less high technology equipment and devices and also weapons for our military. So it'd be a total geopolitical catastrophe. So what should we do about it? We have long maintained what's called a policy of strategic ambiguity about our posture should China invade Taiwan. That was designed in part to keep Beijing guessing. It was also designed in part to restrain rash Taiwanese decisions decades ago about potential independence. Things have changed a lot. Beijing probably has the capability through the People's Liberation Army to invade Taiwan today. So the only question they have is will the United States come to Taiwan's aid? We need to eliminate any doubt about that question. Second, Taiwan is not a military autocracy anymore. Taiwan is one of the most vibrant democracies in the world, and we need to stand up for our Taiwanese democratic partners. So the end state would still be the same. We want no change in the status quo between China and Taiwan, no forcible or non-peaceful change to that status quo. It's just the means to get to that end state would change from one of strategic ambiguity, not being quite clear about what we would do, to strategic clarity, saying simply, we will come to Taiwan's defense should China attack.
If they did attack, do you think we have the ability to sink much or most of the Chinese fleet?
Yes. The PLA probably has the ability to execute the operation to invade and annex Taiwan if it's simply China versus Taiwan. That is not a capability they had 20 or 25 years ago when Bill Clinton sent two carriers to the strait. Today, Beijing's political leaders probably believe that their military can execute that operation if it's just China versus Taiwan. If it's Taiwan and the United States versus China, if you add other democratic allies as well, then no, they do not have the ability to execute that operation, which is why they wouldn't conduct it in the first place and why deterrence through a policy of strategic clarity about our commitment to Taiwan's democracy is the best policy to maintain peace and stability.
Now, Senator, I asked Admiral Stavridis earlier, he demurred as to the number of submarines we have in the South China Sea, and Senator Hagerty demurred on the kind of planes we keep in Japan. But the ability to strike a crushing blow against the Chinese Navy is something we've got to advertise, I think, if we want them to believe it. Do you think we actually have that capacity to strike a crushing blow against what is now a 360-ship combat force?
Yes, Hugh, and I agree with what Stav and Senator Hagerty said about not getting into specific details, but if Joe Biden and Lloyd Austin make it plain that our military is prepared to defend Taiwan's democracy and that we have the ships and the aircraft posture in the Western Pacific to do so, then I believe Xi Jinping will think twice about ever conducting that invasion. If we hem and haw, if we beat around the bush, if we hedge and we trim and we try to suggest that we don't want to ever get to that point, then Xi Jinping is more likely to go for the jugular. And look, and I know that you've heard testimony from the Armed Services community, Hugh, like I have, that says this is a 5-year problem maybe. It's not a 10 or 20-year problem. I know Stav's book is entitled 2034. It's a great work of fiction. I encourage everyone to read it. I think it's even more urgent than that.
I do too.
I'll tell all your listeners this analogy. The Sochi Olympics ended in 2014 on February 23rd. Russia invaded Crimea on February 27th. next year, the Beijing Olympics end on February 23rd.
I couldn't agree with you more. And in fact, Putin's got 80,000 troops in Ukraine right now on the border of the free Ukraine and from the border of the occupied Ukraine. Last quick question. Do you think President Xi and President Putin discussed these matters?
I'm not sure what those two guys discuss when they get together, but I'm sure it's nothing good for Americans. I do believe that they recognize that the United States has interest in both theaters, Europe and the Western Pacific, and to a degree, they don't have nearly as many interests that they have to tend to, and that I would not be surprised if you see opportunistic pressure placed on their interests and our allies in both theaters to probe and see exactly what Joe Biden is made of and what the American response would be. That's why our only response in both theaters has to be clear-eyed, hard-nosed strength.
Senator Tom Cotton, great to talk to you. As always, I appreciate the candor and the ability to succinctly state that, and I hope people are listening. We'll post the audio of that at hughhewitt.com shortly. Let me remind you as well, relieffactor.com. If you're a new listener in Sparta, Tennessee, on News Talk 1050 or anywhere in the United States, relieffactor.com, $19.95. I take it in the first hour. I remind you in hour 2 and 3. Put it in your car, all right? Put it in your car so that when you commute, you'll remember to take it every single day. ReliefFactor.com. I Karen Kirkman, Resveratrol Omega. $19.95. Get you started. Stay tuned.
On the Charlie Kirk Show.
We now have a radical, unproven philosophy, critical race theory, that is running our entire government. The CDC director says racism is a serious public health threat. Quote, a growing body of research shows that centuries of racism in this country has had a profound and negative impact on communities of color. That's not true. It's not true. Read Discrimination and Disparities by Thomas Sowell. Just because there is a disparity does not mean that discrimination is to blame. The fatherless epidemic in the black community is a serious public health threat. You want to know what's keeping black people down? It's not racism. It's government programs, failing public schools, Democrat policies, and the lack of fathers in the home.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Why is it that we have to wait? Is this so often the case for a British tabloid newspaper to report the story of Hunter Biden for anybody to take notice?
Because our media just aren't interested. Our media want to protect the Bidens. They want to protect liberals, most of the media, and they're not honest brokers, right? We knew the contents of this laptop in September and October.
Yeah.
This should have been out and out everywhere. But what do we have instead? Instead, we had the New York Post being blocked from Twitter. Instead, we had CNN and others suggesting that Hunter Biden's own laptop that he signed over was somehow Russian disinformation. Absolute nonsense.
Well, it's strange, isn't it? It's strange to say, it's Russian disinformation. Then for Hunter Biden in a puff piece interview this week say, it could have, I don't know. I'm not sure if it was mine. It could be Russian disinformation. Boris, if your lawyers are demanding the computers back, doesn't that mean they are Hunter Biden's? Am I crazy there?
You're not crazy, my friend. You're not crazy. You're more rational than Hunter Biden. But you're definitely, you're definitely not crazy. This whole thing is such a joke. Hunter Biden is laughing in the face of Americans with these interviews. Jimmy Kimmel, where he dares to attack Don Jr., while T. Hunter is literally the face of nepotism in America. I mean, this is somebody who is a good-for-nothing failure.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening. A special thank you to our new friends in Sparta, Tennessee, not far from the I-40 along historic Highway 70. Sparta, Tennessee is a great new affiliate in the Hugh Hewitt universe, and we're glad to have you. From the New York Times, surging virus has Michigan's Democratic governor at loggerheads with President Biden. The Biden administration and Michigan Democratic governor are locked in an increasingly tense standoff over the state's worst in the nation coronavirus outbreak. So it's worst in the nation. Now, there's a lot of things in Michigan that are worst in the nation. The Tigers, the Lions, the University of Michigan football program, the win-loss record against The Ohio State University. If you're new in our Tennessee audience, you should know I went to the University of Michigan Law School, proud graduate of Ann Arbor's Law School. I treated Michigan like the Vikings treated England. Go there and get whatever is worth having and leave. And I got out of Michigan after 3 years, longest 3 years of my life. It was pretty much icebound most of the 3 years I was there. The harbors were frozen and it rained every day. There's just not much good about Michigan except Hillsdale College and leaving. But in any event, I do have a loyal audience in Detroit. They love me up there. It's like Pittsburgh. They love me in Pittsburgh and Detroit because I speak the truth about those poor people who are living up there in Michigan and trapped in Pittsburgh. And they appreciate it. It's like Radio Free Pittsburgh. This show is Radio Free Michigan and Radio Free Pittsburgh. But Governor Whitmer has managed to not only conduct the most onerous shutdown policy, erratic and voluminous, it's detailed, ambiguous, and unconstitutional. It's ridiculous. She has also managed to have the worst vaccine rollout and the worst coronavirus surge going right now. So Michigan is worst. Now that's really trying. Been a lot of places that have had a lot of bad outbreaks. Governor Cuomo got a bunch of people killed in New York City, but it's now worst in Michigan. We're a year and 2 months into this thing, and Governor Whitmer is the worst governor in the country. So I don't know who the Republicans are going to run in 2022, but that Republican's going to win because Michigan has had it with the most incompetent, least transparent, mercurial. 1-800-520-1234 if anyone wants to call in from Detroit or Ann Arbor or the western part of the state where we are on, or on Radio Free Hillsdale, which is up and running too. 1-800-520-1234. You are welcome to call me right now. But it is unfortunate in the extreme that the poor people of Michigan, already burdened with the worst climate in the United States, have to have the worst governor in the United States, but they do. And the worst governor in the United States is Governor Whitmer. Let me tell you, we will also follow tomorrow morning whatever happens overnight in Minnesota. The Chauvin trial has a few more days to roll. The unrest in the aftermath of the killing of the young black man by the police who thought they pulled the taser and, in fact, pulled a pistol. I'm not expecting anything good to come out of that. Professional sports were shut down. The Timberwolves, the Twins, and they play hockey up there, the Avalanche. But they were all shut down last night. I'm not sure that will continue, but I will keep you posted on that. Bill in Fairfax, Virginia. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Hugh. Great show as always. A quick request. Can we stop using the term democratic to describe the Democrat people? Because we know now, after 4 months in office, there is nothing democratic about them, and let's stop using that term.
Nah, I always call people what they want to be called. That's my theory. And that way, if I call them the Democratic Party, that's what they want to be called. I'm happy to call them that. And if people want to be called pro-life, I call them pro-life. And if they want to be called pro-choice or pro-abortion rights, they call them that. That's just my theory. It's the best way to skip over unnecessary arguments, get to the substance. And the substance is Democrats don't know how to run anything. Rudy in Michigan, calling in from Radio Free Michigan. Hey, Rudy.
Yeah, I like to call it the People's Republic of Michigan, actually. But, yeah, your comments on Michigan are right on. Our governor is pretty awful.
Well, it's the worst right now, your coronavirus numbers are the worst in the country.
And we've had some of the strictest lockdowns, too, California and New York notwithstanding. We still have massive restrictions for restaurants, sporting events, casinos, everything else, too.
And you still can't beat the Ohio State Buckeyes.
Well, I'm not much on sports, so I'll leave that one to you. But yeah, your description was pretty accurate, though.
Yeah, it's a statement of fact, Rudy. Thank you. Diane, also in Michigan, I'm going to get one more in. Hey, Diane.
Hi, how are you?
Good. You still can't beat Ohio State.
Oh, you know what? That's okay. If Michigan, U of M, loses to them, I'm good with that.
All right, good.
Not a Michigan fan. But yeah, our lockdowns are ridiculous. But what I was calling to say was that, unfortunately, I don't think it will be such an easy job for a Republican to beat Whitmer. I can't tell you how many people who I talk to who think everything she's done has been to protect us and that she's just the greatest thing since I don't know what.
Well,
I guess you're right. But
get out there and work. All you have to do is get out there and work, because honestly, when you're the worst country, when you're the worst state in the union when it comes to coronavirus, a year and 2 months into it, you got the least vaccination. Your governor's arguing with the Democratic president. You got to make a switch, Michigan. And Sparta, Tennessee, good to have you with us. Come back tomorrow. Don't miss a minute. Stay tuned to this station. Stay tuned, America, wherever you are, to the Hugh Hewitt Show.